big piece of legislation that could change Social Security for pretty much everyone. It's called the Social Security 2100 Act. And we're not talking about little tweaks here and there. This is a massive proposed overhaul of benefits and how they're funded, all designed to last for the rest of the century.
So let's start with this number, $1,688. That right there is the average monthly Social Security benefit. And for millions of Americans, that's not just some number on a screen. It's their lifeline. I mean, with the cost of everything going up, that fixed income just doesn't go as far as it used to. And that's exactly why this conversation is so important right now.
And this chart, wow, this really shows you just how crucial this is. Think about this for a second. 4 out of every 10 seniors rely on Social Security for almost all of their income. We're talking 90% or more. And if you zoom out a little, you see that for nearly 3/4 of all seniors, these checks make up more than half of their entire budget. It just goes to show you, this isn't just a safety net. For so many people, it is everything.
All right, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with the challenges we're facing right now. Then we'll break down the 2100 Act itself. After that, we'll get into the good stuff, how benefits would actually go up. Then the big question, how to pay for it all. And finally, we'll look at the bill's chances of actually becoming law. So let's set the stage. What problems is the Social Security 2100 Act really trying to solve? Let's take a look at the pressures that have brought us to this point. It really boils down to 3 core issues. First, when you're on a fixed income, your buying power just shrinks as inflation drives up costs. Second, like we just saw, dependency on these benefits is incredibly high. And third, and this is a big one, there's a major debate around the yearly cost of living adjustment, or COLA. You know, that's supposed to be the raise you get to keep up with inflation. But a lot of people argue the way we calculate it now just doesn't reflect what seniors are actually spending their money on.
Okay, so in response to all those challenges, we have the Social Security 2100 Act. So let's really dig in and see what this proposed solution is all about.
So the bill is really built on a few key pillars. First, it wants to boost payments for everyone with an across-the-board increase. It would also change how we calculate that COLA to what supporters say is a much more accurate measure. It also includes some targeted help for specific groups, and it introduces a whole new way to fund the system that would mostly affect the highest earners.
All right, so this is the part you've probably been waiting for. What does all of this mean for your wallet? Let's break down the actual dollars and cents of these proposed benefit increases.
The first huge change in the bill is an immediate 2% increase for every single beneficiary, right across the board. Now, what makes this so significant is that it would be the first real increase of its kind in over 50 years. This isn't your normal COLA.
Really meets the road. If you're getting that average benefit of $1,688, that 2% bump means about $34 extra a month. Annually, that's over $400. Now, that might not sound like a life-changing amount of money, but that could be your entire utility bill for the month. It could cover a few prescription copays or several trips to the grocery store. Over 5 years, that's more than $2,000 in extra income, a real cushion that just isn't there today.
But the impact goes way beyond just that initial boost. The proposal also wants to change the inflation formula itself. Right now, COLA uses something called the CPIW, which tracks what urban workers are buying. The 2100 Act would switch to the CPIE, the Consumer Price Index for the elderly. And what's so interesting about this is that the CPIE gives more weight to the things seniors actually spend more money on, especially healthcare. Over time, that difference would really add up. For example, in 1 year, the old formula might give you a 3% COLA, but the new one might calculate it at 4%. That means your benefits would grow faster and do a much better job of keeping up with your real expenses.
And on top of all that, the bill includes some very specific, targeted support for different groups. It would boost the minimum benefit for seniors with lower incomes. It would improve the benefits for widows and widowers, especially from 2-income households. It would also bring back student benefits up to age 26 for the children of workers who are disabled, deceased, or retired. And it would create something called caregiver credits to make sure that people, and let's be honest, it's mostly women, aren't penalized in retirement for taking time off work to care for a loved one.
Okay, the million-dollar question, or maybe the trillion-dollar question, is how does the bill propose to pay for all of these benefit increases and keep Social Security healthy for the long run?
So, to get this, we first need to understand the Social Security tax cap. Right now, you and your employer each pay a 6.2% tax on your earnings to fund Social Security, but only up to a certain point. In 2024, that cap was $168,600. That means someone making that amount pays the exact same number of dollars in Social Security taxes as someone making millions a year.
The 2100 Act wants to change that system. So for the vast majority of people, nothing changes at all. You'd keep paying the tax just like you do now. Then there'd be this gap. No Social Security tax on earnings between that cap and $400,000. But, and this is the key, for any income above $400,000, that 6.2% tax would kick back in. So essentially, it's asking the highest earners in the country to contribute more to the system.
So we've got the plan, we know how they want to fund it, but what are the odds this thing actually happens? Let's take a look at the bill's outlook. You know, proponents argue this is about way more than just increasing today's benefits. It's about making the entire system stronger. The stated goal is to make sure Social Security can pay out full benefits, not just for a few more years, but all the way through the 21st century. The bill's supporters point to a few key reasons they think it has a real shot. First, polls consistently show that the public is overwhelmingly in favor of protecting and even expanding Social Security. You've also got the senior voting bloc, which is a huge and very influential group. The bill has the backing of major advocacy organizations. And finally, proponents say its funding plan is popular because it specifically targets only the very highest earners.
And that really gets to the core idea here. This isn't just one little tweak. It's a proposal for a complete overhaul. As one analysis puts it, the approach is holistic. The goal isn't just to raise benefits or just to fix the financing, it's to do both, all while modernizing the whole program for a new century.
And all of this leaves us with one final big question, and it's really at the heart of this entire debate. Whether it's through this specific act or some other proposal, the underlying issue is the same. What's the best way forward to make sure this vital program stays strong and provides real financial security for generations to come?
Let's dive into something that could be a massive game changer for millions of Americans. We're talking about a bill that could finally give people the freedom to save for their future without the fear of losing the benefits they absolutely need to survive. It's the bipartisan SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act, and it's aimed at fixing some seriously outdated rules that have kept people in a cycle of poverty for way too long.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at what we're calling the $2,000 savings trap. Then we'll introduce the bill that's designed to fix it. After that, we'll really dig into what it means to have the freedom to plan your future, why there's real hope this time around, and finally, what you can do to help.
Let's just start with this question, because it's at the heart of everything. Seriously, can you imagine a system where doing the responsible thing, putting a little money aside for an emergency, could actually cause you to lose the income you need to live? Well, for millions of people on Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, that's not a hypothetical. It is their day-to-day reality.
And that reality is basically a trap. It's a trap built on these ancient, outdated rules. You see, right now, anyone who gets SSI benefits is stuck with these asset limits that make it almost impossible to get ahead. It forces you into a really terrible choice. Either live on a financial knife's edge or risk losing everything.
$2,000. That is it. For one person. If your countable assets, we're talking about stuff like the cash in your savings account, go one single dollar over that limit, your benefits can be shut off. For a married couple, it's only $1,000 more, just $3,000. These rules literally force people to live in a state of perpetual crisis.
And here's the part that's truly mind-boggling. This limit wasn't set 5 years ago, or 10, or 20. It was set in 1989. For over 35 years, it hasn't budged. It has not been updated for inflation, not once. Just to put that into perspective for you, that $2,000 from back in 1989, you'd need more than $5,000 today just to have the same buying power. The rule is stuck in the past, and that's exactly what this new bill is trying to fix.
So you've got this huge problem. What's the solution on the table? Well, it's a piece of legislation called the SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act. This is the bill, with support from both parties, that's designed to finally break this cycle of forced poverty.
Okay, so what does the act actually do? It's pretty straightforward. First, it raises those asset limits, a lot. We're talking up to $10,000 for individuals and $20,000 for couples. But here's the other crucial part. It ties these new limits to inflation. That means they would go up automatically with the cost of living, which would make sure we never ever end up in this ridiculous situation again.
And a key reason this has a real shot is that it's not a partisan food fight. This quote here is from a Republican co-sponsor in the House, Representative Brian Fitzpatrick. He's saying it plain as day. The current system traps people. It gets in the way of their financial independence. It's a powerful economic argument for making a change.
And then you hear the same exact sentiment from the other side of the aisle. Here's Senator Ron Wyden, a top Democratic sponsor over in the Senate. He frames it as giving people the freedom and the dignity to plan for their own lives. When you have this kind of agreement across the political spectrum, well, that's when you know there's a real chance for something to happen.
I mean, just look at this side by side. The difference is night and day. The individual limit goes from a measly $2,000 to $10,000. For couples, it's from $3,000 all the way to $20,000. But that last row, that might be the most important part of the whole thing. The inflation adjustment. Going from a simple no to a yes is the long-term fix that future-proofs the whole system.
Okay, so let's set aside the politics and the policy numbers for a second. Let's talk about real life. What would a change like this actually mean for a person? What does having the freedom to plan your future actually look like?
$10,000. You know, this isn't just a number. It's a meaningful amount of money that can genuinely change a person's life. It's the difference between lying awake at night with constant anxiety and having a real sense of security. It's the difference between being trapped by your circumstances and having the power to actually make choices about your own life.
So what does a $10,000 cushion unlock? Well, it unlocks a real emergency fund, right? Enough to handle a big car repair or a surprise medical bill without everything falling apart. It unlocks a reliable car to get to work or to a doctor's appointment. It unlocks housing security, maybe enough for a deposit on a safer, better apartment. It can unlock critical health care, like dental work that isn't covered, or open up new doors through education. At the end of the day, it unlocks a better quality of life. Simple as that.
Let's make this super real. Think about someone like Jessica. She's 35, she's on SSI, her car is always on the fritz, and she wants to take some community college classes to get a better job, but she can't because she's not allowed to save the money for tuition. Under this new bill, she could save up for a dependable car, pay for those classes, and still have a safety net. For her, this bill is a direct path toward more independence.
Or take Robert's story. He's 68, living in an apartment with a mold problem that's making his asthma worse. He also needs thousands of dollars in dental work that he just can't afford. Right now, he is completely stuck. But with the freedom to save, he could finally get the healthcare he desperately needs and save up a deposit to move to a safe, healthy apartment. This is about dignity. It's about letting people take care of their own health and live in a safe place.
Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking. This all sounds great, but Congress has known about this for decades. Why would they fix it now? And you know what? I get the skepticism. It's completely valid. But there are some very real reasons to believe that this time could actually be different.
It really comes down to momentum. Like we've been saying, there is strong bipartisan support. This isn't being used as a political football. The bill is also really focused. It does one thing and it does it well, which makes it much easier to pass. You add to that the fact that more and more people are aware of this problem, and it's backed by a huge coalition of advocacy groups for seniors and people with disabilities. At its core, it just fixes a fundamental issue of fairness that's really hard to argue against.
So that brings us to the most important part. How can we get this across the finish line? This bill has a real shot, but hope alone doesn't pass laws. People do. And there are some simple, concrete things you can do because your voice really is critical here. Okay, here's the playbook. First, contact your representatives in Congress. It's easy to find their contact info online. Just call or email and say you support the SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act. Second, if you have a personal story about how these limits have affected you or someone you love, share it. Third, spread the word. Post about it on social media to help raise awareness. And finally, when it's time to vote, remember who is actually committed to fixing this broken system.
So we'll end right where we started, but maybe with a bit more perspective. What would the freedom to save really mean? For you, for your family, or for people in your community? Because this is about so much more than money. It's about freedom, it's about dignity, and it's about the opportunity for everyone to build a secure future. That's what's on the line, and that's why this is such an important fight.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into a major proposal to reform Social Security. And we're not talking about small tweaks here and there. This is a complete top-to-bottom plan designed to expand benefits, make sure the system is solid for decades to come, and most importantly, put more money into the pockets of millions of retirees.
So let's just start with the headline number, the one that really makes you stop and think. What if your benefits went up by an extra $200 every single month? That adds up, right? That's an extra $2,400 a year. This figure is the absolute cornerstone of this proposal. But to really get why that number is so important, we have to look at what's happening for a lot of folks right now.
Right now, the average person on Social Security gets just under $1,700 a month. And you know as well as I do, with the cost of groceries, rent, and healthcare going up and up, that money just doesn't go as far as it used to. In fact, it's pretty staggering. For almost 40% of seniors, Social Security makes up 90% or more of their entire income. That makes things really tight. And that's the exact problem this new plan is trying to solve.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the big picture, the vision for a more secure future. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the plan's key parts, and of course, how it's all paid for. Then, the part you're probably most interested in, what it could actually mean for your monthly budget. And we'll wrap up with the long-term vision this plan has for retirement in America.
Okay, so what's the main goal here? Well, it's really about tackling those financial pressures we just talked about head on. It's about making sure that Social Security can provide real, genuine security, especially when costs are rising. This proposal is one very specific idea for how to get there. The whole plan really rests on three big pillars. First, not just preventing cuts, but actually expanding the benefits people receive. Second, making sure the program is financially sound for the next 75 years. I mean, that's stability for our kids and grandkids. And third, the immediate goal, a direct boost to your monthly income to help you keep up.
Okay, so how does this vision become a reality? What are the actual changes? Let's dig into the 5 major benefit expansions that are really the heart and soul of this proposal.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. First, you've got that headline number we talked about, a $200 a month increase across the board for everyone. Then it changes how the annual cost of living adjustment, the COLA, is calculated. It would switch to a formula called the CPIE, which is just a fancy way of saying it would weigh things that seniors spend more money on, like healthcare, more heavily. So your annual adjustments would be more in line with your actual cost. The plan also boosts the minimum benefit to make sure people who worked their whole lives don't retire into poverty. It gives credits to people who had to leave the workforce to be caregivers, and it brings back benefits for students whose parents were disabled or have passed away. Of course, the question on everyone's mind is always, great, but how are you going to pay for it? And this plan has a very specific answer. It proposes a pretty big shift in how Social Security is funded, with the goal of having the wealthiest Americans contribute more while leaving taxes the same for almost everybody else. So here's how the money part works. Right now, there's a cap on how much of your income is taxed for Social Security. This plan would keep that cap, but start applying the tax again on all wages over $250,000. It would also apply the tax to some investment income, but only for very high earners. And now, look at that third point. This is a huge benefit for a lot of retirees. It would get rid of federal income taxes on Social Security benefits completely. For many, that means more money in their pocket, plain and simple. And this number really says it all. According to the analysis of the plan, 93% of households, get this, would not see their taxes go up by a single penny. The main takeaway here is that the money needed to pay for all these expanded benefits and to secure the system would come from asking only the very top earners to chip in more. Okay, now for the part that really hits home. We've talked about the big ideas, but what would this plan actually do for you and your wallet? Let's get really specific and break down the numbers to see the real-life impact these changes could have. Let's look at what this could mean for an average person on Social Security. First, you get that $200 a month benefit increase. That's straightforward. But then, you've got to remember that about 40% of people right now pay federal income tax on their benefits, and it averages out to about $150 a month. By getting rid of that tax, they'd get to keep that money. So you add the $200 boost to the $150 in tax savings, and suddenly, you're looking at a potential increase of $350 every single month. So just think about that for a second. $350. For a lot of people, that is a game changer. That's the difference between just scraping by and actually feeling secure. It's the difference between delaying a doctor's visit and being able to afford the care you need. Let's look at some real costs. This table really puts it all into perspective. That monthly Medicare Part B premium, it's about $170. This $350 increase covers that, and you've still got money left over. What about going to the dentist for a cleaning, which Medicare usually doesn't cover? That's about $100. Covered. The average senior spends about $100 a month on prescriptions. Covered. Need a new pair of glasses? That can easily be $300. Covered. We're not just talking about covering one expense. This is enough to potentially cover several essential costs each month. To really see the difference, let's look at an example they gave. This is Margaret, a 72-year-old widow. Before the plan, after she pays all her essential bills, she has about $580 left for everything else. But after the plan, with that extra $200 benefit and the $150 she saves on taxes, her extra income jumps to $930. That's a huge shift. That's the difference between a really tight budget and having the flexibility to afford dental work, new glasses, and even travel to see her family.
So, if we pull the lens back from the monthly budget, what's the long-term vision here? Well, this plan is also about providing some lasting peace of mind and building a system that really reflects what the public wants to see.
And it's really important to see where public opinion is on this. A recent survey found that a massive majority, 79% of American adults, say that Social Security benefits should not be reduced, not in any way. And that support crosses all political and demographic lines. People want the program protected.
You hear this word solvency thrown around all the time in debates about Social Security. It just means the program's ability to pay all its promised benefits in full, on time. By asking the highest earners to contribute more, this plan would not only fund all the benefit expansions we've talked about, but, according to its supporters, it would extend the solvency of the trust funds for a full 75 years.
So in the end, this proposal gives us one very clear vision for the future of retirement. It really makes us ask that fundamental question. What is the best way forward to make sure Social Security stays that bedrock of economic security for every American? Not just today, but for generations to come.
Today we are talking about some really big, potentially life-changing news for millions of people who get Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. We're going to break down a major proposal called the SSI Restoration Act. And believe me, if you or anyone you know has felt trapped by the current SSI rules, this is an explainer you're going to want to stick around for.
Just let that sink in for a second. Imagine being told you can't build a real emergency fund, that you can't save up for a decent car to get to the doctor. Imagine that if you fall in love and decide to get married, your income actually gets cut. This isn't some hypothetical situation. For millions of older and disabled Americans, this is their reality every single day. But there's a serious plan on the table to change all of it.
So to really get why this new act is such a big deal, we first have to understand the problem it's trying to fix. You see, the current SSI program, which is a financial lifeline for over 7 million people, is running on a set of rules that are, well, ancient. They haven't really been updated in decades. And these rules have created what a lot of people call the SSI trap, a system that, by accident or not, can keep people stuck in a cycle of poverty.
It really all starts with this thing called the asset limit. That's the total amount of money and resources you're allowed to have. Right now, for one person, that limit is just $2,000. If you're married and both of you get SSI, it's only $3,000 combined. If your savings go $1 over that limit, you could lose your benefits. All of them. This forces people to live right on the financial edge, completely unable to prepare for even a small emergency.
And get this, the last time Congress updated these limits was 1989. 1989. To give you some perspective, that $2,000 from back then, it would be worth almost $5,000 today just because of inflation. So by leaving these limits frozen in time for over 30 years, the rule has gotten tighter and tighter, making it pretty much impossible to build any kind of safety net in today's world.
But here's the good news. There's a big push for a major overhaul, and that brings us to the SSI Restoration Act. Now, this isn't just a minor tweak here or a small adjustment there. Nope. This is a full-blown, comprehensive bill designed to drag the entire SSI program into the 21st century and fix the core problems that have been holding people back for so long.
And the goals of the act are super clear. It's all about updating the financial rules so they actually make sense in today's economy. The whole point is to give people a real shot at financial security and, maybe most importantly, to restore a sense of dignity and choice for the millions who depend on these benefits to live.
Okay, so what would actually change? Let's get into the nitty-gritty, because the numbers we're about to talk about are a huge deal. We're going to break down the biggest financial upgrades that are the heart and soul of the SSI Restoration Act. We're talking asset limits, benefit amounts, the whole shebang.
First up, the big one, the asset limits. The act proposes to increase the limit for an individual from that old $2,000 cap all the way up to $10,000. That's a five-fold increase. This is probably the most talked about part of the bill, and it's easy to see why. It directly attacks that core problem of forcing people to live with zero financial cushion.
When you see these two bars side by side like this, it really hits you, right? This isn't some tiny little change. It is a complete rethinking of what it means to allow someone to have a safety net. The massive gap between these two bars,
That's the difference between always being one car repair away from a crisis and actually being able to save and plan for your future. And for couples, it's just as big of a deal. Their combined limit would jump from $3,000 to $20,000. But honestly, the most important part of this whole thing might be that little phrase at the end, indexed to inflation. This is the game changer. It means that these new limits would automatically go up each year with the cost of living, so we'd never end up in this mess again, with rules that are 30 years out of date. It's a permanent fix.
Now, beyond just savings, the Act also looks at the monthly check itself. Right now, the maximum federal SSI benefit, which is $943 a month in 2024, leaves a person living at about 75% of the federal poverty level. Think about that. You can get the absolute maximum benefit and still officially be living in poverty. The SSI Restoration Act would raise that base benefit up to 100% of the poverty level, and that would mean a pretty significant raise in that monthly check for every single person on SSI.
Next up is a rule that many people find, frankly, just cruel. It's called the marriage penalty. The way it works now, if two people on SSI get married, their combined benefit isn't just their two checks added together. Oh no. The program actually cuts their total income by 25%. The SSI Restoration Act says no more. It would get rid of this penalty completely so people could get married without taking a huge financial hit.
Let's make this super clear with a quick example. Let's say we have Sarah and James. If they're not married, they each get their $943 benefit. Together, that's $1,886 coming into their household. But if they get married, the current rules slash their combined check down to just $1,415. That's a loss of $471 every single month. That's over $5,600 a year just gone, simply for getting married. Eliminating this penalty would mean couples like Sarah and James get to keep that money and build a life together.
So, we've gone through the policy, the numbers, the percentages, but what does all of this actually mean in a person's real life? How do these changes on paper translate into actual relief and new opportunities? Let's talk about the real world, day-to-day impact these reforms could have.
Because this is the most important question, isn't it? An extra few $100 a month or being able to save a few $1,000s sounds nice, but what does that empower you to actually do? What doors does it open that right now are locked tight? Let's really dig into the possibilities.
With a $10,000 asset limit, you can finally breathe. You can actually plan for the future. I mean, think about it. You could build a real emergency fund for when the water heater breaks. You could save up for a security deposit to move to a safer apartment or a place that's more accessible. You could save for a reliable used car, buy a computer, or even invest in some job training. These aren't luxuries. These are the basic tools for a stable life that are out of reach for so many right now.
And what about that bigger monthly check? Well, that extra cash flow could mean finally being able to afford dental work or new glasses or hearing aids that aren't covered by other programs. It could mean being able to afford prescriptions that Medicaid doesn't cover or buying healthier, more nutritious food. It could just mean being able to afford a bus pass to get around town. Every single one of these things is a huge boost to someone's quality of life.
So when you put all these pieces together, you start to see a real pathway emerging. It starts with just being able to save money without being punished for it. That creates a stable foundation. And with that stability, you can afford better housing and better health care. From there, you can actually invest in yourself, in education, in tools for work. What this shows is that this proposal isn't just about giving people more money. It's about creating a ramp that can lead from dependency towards real financial security and opportunity. It could turn SSI from a trap into a stepping stone.
And that really brings us to the final, most important point. Beyond all the numbers and the charts, at its heart, this whole proposal is about dignity. It's about treating people not as a line item on a budget, but as human beings with hopes and dreams. How does allowing someone to save for their own future or marry the person they love without a penalty, how does that change their sense of self-worth? The SSI Restoration Act basically argues that fixing these financial rules isn't just about economics. It's about doing what's right, and that can have a profound impact on millions of lives.
So, there's a new proposal making the rounds in Congress that could add an extra $200 to every single Social Security check every single month. It's called the Social Security Expansion Act, and today we're going to break down exactly how it would work, who'd pay for it, and really what it could mean for your financial peace of mind.
Okay, let's kick things off with just one number, $1,688. Right now, that's the average Social Security benefit people receive each month. And for millions of retirees, let's be clear, this isn't just some extra spending money, it's the absolute foundation they rely on to live.
And you know, that reliance, it's huge. Just look at this chart. Almost 3/4 of seniors depend on Social Security for more than half of their total income. This isn't just a safety net. For a whole lot of folks, it's pretty much the primary lifeline.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the financial pressures people are facing right now. Then, we'll dive into the Expansion Act itself. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how it works, what that extra $200 a month could really mean, and finally, where the bill goes from here.
All right, first up, let's talk about the why. Why is this even a conversation? Well, for anyone on a fixed income, rising costs can create some really intense financial strain.
So, think about it. You've got this average benefit, which isn't huge to begin with. Then you see that a huge number of people rely on it for most or even almost all of their income. You throw in inflation and healthcare costs going up, and suddenly that money just doesn't stretch as far. That's the financial squeeze, and it's the core problem this act is trying to fix.
Okay, so that's the problem. What's the proposed solution? It's a piece of legislation called the Social Security Expansion Act, and it has some very, very specific goals. So at its core, this act is trying to do three big things. First, give a direct boost to monthly benefits. Second, make sure those benefits actually keep up with the real cost of living. And third, shore up the whole system for the next 75 years. So how does this whole thing actually work under the hood? It's not just one simple change. It's a pretty comprehensive plan that's built on three key pillars. They all work together to boost those benefits and make the system more secure. Let's break each one down.
The first pillar is the one that gets all the headlines. It's a direct increase of $2,400 a year. That breaks down to an extra $200 every single month, and this isn't for some select group. We're talking about every single current and new Social Security recipient. Doesn't matter if you're on retirement, disability, or survivor benefits, this increase would apply across the board.
All right, the second big piece of this puzzle, and this one's a real game changer for the long run, is all about how we calculate the cost of living adjustment, or COLA. Right now, we use a formula based on what working age people buy. The problem, they spend way less on things like healthcare than retirees do. This proposal says, let's switch to the CPI-E, which is the Consumer Price Index for the elderly. It's based on what people 62 and older actually buy, so it gives more weight to those big-ticket items like healthcare. The whole point is to have a COLA that actually reflects the cost of living for seniors.
Okay, the big question, right? How do you pay for all this? Well, here's the plan. Right now, you only pay Social Security taxes on the first $168,600 or so of your income. This proposal keeps that, but it adds the tax back on for all earnings above $250,000. So there's this gap, this sort of donut hole in the middle that stays completely untouched. According to the people who wrote the bill, this means over 93% of households wouldn't see their taxes go up at all.
And you know, it's not just about those three main pillars. There are a few other really important pieces in this bill. For people who worked for many years in low-wage jobs, it bumps up the special minimum benefit. It also brings back benefits for students up to age 22 if their parents were disabled or have passed away. And of course, the big one, all these funding changes are designed to keep the entire Social Security Trust Fund solvent for another 75 years.
Okay, let's get down to brass tacks. What does an extra $200 a month really mean for a family's budget? I mean, it's not just a number. Over a year, that's $2,400. And over 10 years, that's $24,000. Let's look at the real-world difference that kind of money could make.
And you know, supporters of this bill will tell you it's not really about the money. It's about what the money represents. It's dignity. It's security. It's having that little bit of a cushion so you're not forced to choose between buying medicine or buying food. It's about peace of mind.
Let's take healthcare, for example. It's a huge one, right? One of the biggest and most unpredictable costs for seniors. Well, that extra $200 a month could more than cover the standard Medicare Part B premium. Just think about that for a second. That premium just gone. Covered. Or it could handle the average cost of prescription drugs. It could pay for dental care, which Medicare usually doesn't touch, or a new pair of glasses. These aren't luxuries, they're absolute necessities.
And of course, it doesn't stop with healthcare. That ripple effect touches pretty much every part of daily life. In housing, $2,400 a year could be a huge help with property taxes or insurance. For transportation, it could cover a whole year of car insurance or buy a lot of gas. And at the grocery store, it means having the freedom to choose healthier foods instead of just whatever's cheapest. It provides flexibility where, for many, there currently is none.
All right, so this all sounds pretty significant. But what's the reality? Where does this bill actually stand right now? Because it's one thing to have a great plan on paper, but it's a whole other thing to get it passed into law.
Right now, this is a bill in Congress, but what's really interesting here is the public mood around it. Poll after poll shows that most Americans, from all political backgrounds, believe Social Security benefits should be protected and maybe even expanded. That kind of widespread agreement puts a lot of political pressure on lawmakers to do something, especially as more and more people reach retirement age.
And really, that's what this all boils down to. As our country gets older and the cost of everything keeps climbing, the conversation about Social Security is more important than ever. So, proposals like this one, they're more than just bills. They're forcing us to ask some really big questions about what we want retirement security to look like for ourselves and for the generations that come after us. The debate itself is shaping our future.
What if the government just stopped taxing your Social Security benefits? I mean, completely. For millions of retirees, that could actually happen. Today, we're breaking down a new bill in Congress called the You Earned It, You Keep It Act. And yeah, it's a proposal to make your Social Security income entirely tax-free. All right, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we need to understand how things work right now. Then, we'll get into the new proposal, see how they plan to pay for it, and then the big one, what it could mean for your wallet. Finally, we'll look at why supporters are pushing so hard for this change. Okay, first things first, let's get a really clear picture of the system we have right now. You might be surprised at just how many people are paying federal taxes on the benefits they've worked their whole lives to earn. So, who's actually paying taxes on their benefits as we speak? Well, it turns out it's about 40% of everyone who gets them. And whether you're in that group or not, it all comes down to a special IRS calculation called your combined income. Now check out how these income levels work. If you're a single filer, a combined income as low as 25 grand can trigger taxes on up to half your benefits. But then if you cross just 34,000, bam, suddenly up to 85% of your benefits could be taxed. The numbers are a little higher for married couples, but it's the exact same principle. So what on earth is this combined income? Well, it's a specific formula the IRS uses. They take your adjusted gross income, they add in any non-taxable interest you have, and then, and this is the real kicker, they add back in half of your Social Security benefits. That little formula is exactly what pushes so many retirees over those tax thresholds we just saw. Okay, so with that system in mind, let's turn to this new proposal, because it's not just a tweak. It's designed to completely overhaul these rules. The You Earned It, You Keep It Act, which was introduced by Representative Angie Craig, has one very simple, very clear goal: to make sure that the Social Security benefits you receive are no longer considered taxable income by the federal government, period. And this really shows you how profound the change is. We would go from a system where up to 85% of your benefits could get taxed down to zero. A big, fat zero. No more complicated income math, no more worrying about federal thresholds. The benefits you get would be yours to keep. So a change this big obviously raises a major question. How would this actually work? And more importantly, how would it get paid for? Well, the bill lays out a pretty clear two-part plan. It really does two main things. First, it just gets rid of the tax by saying Social Security doesn't count as part of your gross income. Simple enough? Second, to pay for it, the bill adjusts the Social Security payroll tax so that it also kicks in for all earnings above $400,000. The idea is to make sure the trust fund stays healthy. And the timeline here is pretty direct too. If this bill passes, the changes would apply starting with the 2025 tax year. That means seniors would actually see this relief when they sit down to file their taxes in 2026. All right, now for the part I'm sure you've been waiting for. What could this actually mean for your bank account? Let's take a look at the numbers based on what the source material tells us. So, according to the source material, for the 40% of beneficiaries who are currently paying this tax, the average they're paying is about $1,800 a year. Let's break that down. That's an extra $150 a month that could go right back into their pockets. Let's make this really concrete with an example from the source. Imagine a single person getting $1,800 a month from Social Security plus another $20,000 in other income. Their combined income puts them in a bracket where they're paying almost $700 a year in taxes just on their benefits. This bill would put an extra $58 back in their pocket every single month. Now, let's look at a married couple with a bit more income. Here, the impact is even bigger.
In this scenario, their income pushes them into that top tax bracket for benefits. Right now, they're paying over $3,000 a year just on their Social Security. If this bill passes, they'd save a whopping $256 every single month. You can really see it here. For that married couple, the impact is just dramatic. Their monthly tax payment on Social Security benefits, it just vanishes. It drops from $256 all the way down to nothing. For anyone on a fixed income, that kind of change is a true game changer. So, what's the argument for making this huge change right now? Why the big push? Let's look at the case that supporters of the bill are making.
Well, proponents are pointing to a few key things. First off, the idea is reportedly really popular with voters, no matter their politics, and the bill already has support from both parties in Congress. They also argue the funding plan is fair. It would make a confusing tax process way simpler for millions, and it's already got the backing of major groups like the AARP and the Senior Citizens League. But really, the whole argument boils down to a pretty simple idea of fairness. A lot of people see this as a form of double taxation. You pay taxes on your income your whole life to fund Social Security, and then you get taxed again when you finally receive the benefits. Supporters are basically saying that for people who've earned these benefits, this change is just long overdue. And that brings us to our final thought for today. A proposal like the You Earned It, You Keep It Act isn't just some small tweak to the tax code. It directly affects the financial security of millions of Americans. And really, it raises bigger questions about what retirement should look like in this country. So it leaves us with something to think about. How could a fundamental change like this shift the entire conversation we're having about funding our futures?
Tens of millions of Americans depend on Social Security and SSI. And right now, there are a couple of major proposals on the table that could change those benefits in a really big way. So we're going to break down the hard numbers and see what these plans could actually mean for your wallet, for your budget, and honestly, for your peace of mind. Let's dive in.
Just look at this number for a second. $70. Now, I want you to imagine that after you've paid your rent, your electric bill, your groceries, your prescriptions, all the absolute must-pays. This is what you have left. Not for the week, for the entire month. What could you even do with that? Could you grab a coffee with a friend? Get a birthday gift for your grandkid? What if your car gets a flat tire? For way too many people, the answer to those questions is a really stressful no way.
And that $70 scenario? That's not just some hypothetical exercise we're doing. For millions of seniors and folks with disabilities who are living on a fixed income, that is their reality, month in and month out. It's this constant, grinding financial squeeze that forces them to make impossible choices every single day. Let's break down exactly how this happens.
So, on average, a Social Security recipient gets about $1,900 a month. Seems okay, right? But watch how fast it just evaporates. Right off the top, over a third of it, poof, gone, just for housing. Then you add in the other basics, utilities, groceries, getting around. But here's the real budget breaker for so many, healthcare. We're talking over $550 a month between general costs and prescriptions. And after all that is said and done, you're left with $70. There is zero room for error, a broken microwave, a new pair of glasses. Forget about it. That is the squeeze, right there in black and white.
So, just how critical is this income? Well, this chart says it all. For a whopping 40% of seniors, Social Security makes up at least half of their entire income. And then look at the smaller slice, 14%. For them, Social Security is basically everything they have. We're talking 90% or more of their income. So for this group, it isn't just some safety net, it's their entire livelihood. And that's why any change to it, no matter how small it seems, has absolutely massive consequences.
Okay, so with that pretty stark reality in mind, let's turn to the potential solutions that are actually being discussed. There are two key pieces of legislation out there designed specifically to deal with this financial pressure cooker: the Social Security Expansion Act and the SSI Restoration Act.
Let's look at what these two acts would actually do. On one hand, the Social Security Expansion Act is pretty straightforward. It would give an extra $200 a month to every single person receiving Social Security. That's a flat increase of $2,400 a year. Pretty significant. On the other hand, the SSI Restoration Act has a different focus. It's about supplemental security income, and its goal is to pull recipients out of poverty by raising their benefits up to the official federal poverty line. For some of our most vulnerable citizens, that would be an immediate, life-changing increase.
You know, when you strip away all the legislative jargon and the dollar figures, the mission behind both of these proposals is actually really simple and profoundly human. It's about changing a life filled with constant financial anxiety, where every single expense feels like a potential crisis, into a life where people can actually afford what they need, maybe plan a little for the unexpected, and just live with a basic sense of security and dignity. To really see what that means, let's look at a real-world example.
All right, so all these policies and numbers can feel a little abstract, so let's make it tangible. I want you to meet Margaret. She's 72, and she relies completely on her Social Security income. Her story is going to show us what this shift from stress to security actually looks like on a personal level.
This quote, wow, it just gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? These aren't choices about luxuries. This isn't should I go out to dinner or save for a vacation. For Margaret, and for millions of people just like her, the choice is between two absolute necessities: food or medicine. It's an impossible daily calculation that just creates this constant level of stress, which, as you can imagine, takes a huge physical and emotional toll.
Okay, here's the breakdown of Margaret's monthly budget. Her total income is $1,650, but after she pays for rent, utilities, food, and her health care, she's left with just $120 for the entire month. That has to cover everything else: toiletries, clothes, any extra doctor copays. A single unexpected car problem would be a complete financial disaster. There is just no breathing room.
Now, let's see what happens when we apply the Social Security Expansion Act to her budget. Her income immediately jumps by that $200, up to $1,850. And look at the incredible difference this makes. Her main expenses, like rent and medicine, they stay the same. But look at the changes she can finally make. She can increase her grocery budget by $70. That's the line item for dignity right there. It means she can now afford the fresh fruits and vegetables her doctor's been telling her to eat. But the biggest change, the real game changer, is this new line item, an emergency fund. For the very first time, Margaret can actually put away $100 each month. This completely transforms her financial world from just reacting to crises to actually planning ahead. And even after all that, she still has $150 left over. This is what stability looks like.
So when we ask, what does $200 really buy, the answer isn't just a lose without having a panic attack. But really, at the end of the day, what it truly buys is the one thing that's priceless: peace of mind. That reduction in daily stress is worth everything.
But the impact of these proposed increases doesn't just stop with one person's budget. It's not just Margaret's story. It actually creates this positive ripple effect that can make entire communities stronger. Here's how that ripple effect works. First, local economies get a real boost. Seniors tend to spend that extra money right in their own communities, at the local grocery store, the pharmacy, the corner auto shop. Second, and this is a big one, it can actually help lower healthcare costs for everyone. Why? Because better nutrition and people taking their medication consistently means fewer expensive preventable trips to the emergency room. And finally, it strengthens the very fabric of the community. When seniors aren't totally consumed by financial stress, they have the energy and the freedom to contribute more, whether it's volunteering or just being active in local groups.
So you see, this isn't just about helping one group of people. Investing in the financial security of our seniors and those with disabilities is really a strategy for creating more vibrant, more stable, and more prosperous local economies for all of us. A senior's personal victory over financial stress becomes a shared victory for their entire town.
And all of this brings us to the final fundamental question here. We've seen the numbers, and they're pretty clear. A couple of $100 a month can be the difference between a life of constant grinding stress and one of basic stability, health, and dignity. The debate around these proposals really boils down to this: what value do we as a society place on making sure that the people who contributed for a lifetime can live their later years with some security? What is the price of dignity, and who is responsible for ensuring it?
If you've been keeping an eye on the news about benefits, your head is probably spinning, right? You're hearing about a $2,400 boost over here, and then $1,200 monthly checks over there. It's a total whirlwind, and honestly, it's super confusing. So what we're going to do right now is slice through all that noise. We're going to break down exactly what these plans are, who they're actually for, and what it all could mean for your wallet.
So yeah, let's really get into this, because this is the big one, isn't it? Are these numbers part of the same plan? Or are we talking about two totally separate things? And, you know, the question I bet you're really asking is, hey, could I get both? It's so easy to see how these things get tangled up in the headlines, but trust me, they are two very, very different ideas. Our goal here is simple. We're going to give you the clarity you've been looking for. You'll know exactly what each plan is
and what it's not. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll talk about this flood of proposals out there. Then we'll dig into Plan 1, that's the $2,400 boost. After that, Plan 2, the $1,200 monthly checks. Then, the one you're waiting for, can you get both? And we'll wrap up by looking at the bigger picture, why all this is happening right now. All right, Section 1, a flood of proposals. Let's try to make some sense of all the different plans being discussed. I mean, it really feels like every single week there's a new idea or a new bill being talked about, right? So let's just categorize them a bit to figure out what's what.
You know, it's so easy to get lost in all the headlines. And you might have even seen some of these ideas pop up in your local news. There are all kinds of city and state level programs being tested out. But for today, to keep things simple and focused, we are zeroing in on the two big ones, the major national proposals. Because, let's face it, those are the ones that would affect everybody.
Okay, before we get any deeper, we've got to clear something up. There's some key jargon here, GBI and UBI. Guaranteed basic income versus universal basic income. They sound similar, but they are not the same thing. Think of it like this. UBI, the U stands for universal, means everybody gets it. Rich, poor, everyone, no questions asked. GBI, on the other hand, that G is for guaranteed, but only for a specific group of people, usually based on their income. The big national plans we're talking about today, they're GBI. All right, on to Section 2. Let's talk about Plan 1, the $2,400 boost. This is all about the Social Security Expansion Act. And the first thing to know is, this isn't some brand new payment program. Nope. This is all about boosting an existing one. We're talking about a direct increase to Social Security benefits. So, the magic number everyone's talking about is this, an extra $2,400 a year. Now, what does that really mean? It means an extra $200 every single month. And look, for anyone on a fixed income, you know that $200 isn't just pocket change. That's a huge deal. That could cover groceries for the week, a utility bill, or those annoying copays. It's a real, tangible difference, and it's the heart of this proposal.
So how would this thing actually work? Well, the official name is the Social Security Expansion Act. You've probably heard lawmakers like Senator Bernie Sanders talking about it, and here's who it's for. As the bill's written right now, it's for all Social Security beneficiaries. That means retirement, disability, survivors, the whole shebang. And the other critical piece of the puzzle is the funding. Where does the money come from? It would come from the Social Security system itself, funded by payroll taxes through the Social Security Trust Fund.
Okay, now let's switch gears completely for Section 3. We're looking at Plan 2, those $1,200 monthly checks. And this is a whole different ballgame. We're no longer talking about tweaking an existing program. This is about creating something brand new from the ground up, a national guaranteed basic income.
And the numbers here are even bigger. We're talking $1,200 every single month for each eligible adult, plus another $600 for each dependent. I mean, let's do the math. That's over $14,000 a year for one person. For a couple, you're looking at almost $29,000 before you even add in dependents. A key piece of legislation here is called the Support Act, and the whole idea is to create a recurring payment like a national income floor for people.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty. How would this GBI plan work? Well, a major difference right off the bat, eligibility has nothing to do with being in a specific program like Social Security. Nope, it's all about your income. The Support Act, for instance, sets the cutoff at around $75,000 for an individual. The funding is also totally separate. This money isn't coming from the Social Security Trust Fund, it would come from general federal funds. Think of it like the stimulus checks we saw a few years back. Same kind of idea.
Okay, let's put these two plans side by side. This is where the light bulb really goes on. You've got the Social Security boost, that's an increase to a benefit you already have, for Social Security beneficiaries only, and paid for by the Social Security Fund. Then you've got the National GBI, that's a brand new program for people based on their income and paid for with general federal money. See? They're like two different trains running on two separate tracks. Getting this difference is absolutely crucial for what comes next.
Which, of course, brings us to Section 4, and the question that I know is on your mind. Could you get both payments? If both of these proposals actually became law, could one person get money from both? Let's find out.
So let's really spell it out. Could a fixed income beneficiary get payments from both of these proposals at the same time? Imagine you're on Social Security. The first plan passes, boom, you get an extra $200 a month. Then the second plan passes, and your income qualifies you. Could you also get that $1,200 check on top of it? That's the million-dollar question, right? And the answer is yes. Simple as that. Based on how these proposals are written right now, you absolutely could. I know, it might sound a little too good to be true, but when you see how they're designed, the logic is actually rock solid.
So why isn't this double dipping? It really boils down to two super simple reasons. First, they are separate programs. They just are. One is a tweak to your Social Security, and the other is a totally new income program. They don't overlap. And second, and this is huge, they have separate funding. Remember, one is paid from the Social Security Trust Fund, the other from general federal funds. It's like getting your paycheck from your job and also winning a lottery prize. Two different pots of money.
So that leads us to our last section, the future of benefits. You have to wonder, right? Why are these huge conversations happening right now? The answer is pretty interesting. It's because a lot of folks in Washington aren't just looking at today, they're looking down the road, 5, 10 years from now. See, the argument is that lawmakers are looking ahead, and they believe a national income floor is needed before it's too late. The idea is that our economy is about to go through a massive, massive change because of technology. And the people pushing for these plans are saying, look, we need to build this safety net now, before things get crazy. It's about being proactive instead of just reacting to a crisis after it's already here.
And you can hear that urgency when they talk about what's coming. They say things like, we're going to be completely overrun by AI, sophisticated technology, robotics, automation. And that's really the heart of it. The fear is that all this new tech is going to eliminate a ton of jobs, and soon. The thinking is that this isn't science fiction anymore. This is a real economic shift that's just around the corner, and something like a GBI might be the only thing that provides some stability.
And really, that leaves us with the biggest question of all. As technology reshapes the entire workforce, how must our economic safety nets evolve? Because at the end of the day, this whole debate isn't just about a specific dollar amount. It's not just about $2,400 or $1,200. The real conversation is about what our safety nets are even for. As technology changes the very definition of a job, how do we make sure everyone has some level of economic security? That's the question that's really pushing all of this forward.
We're going to talk about some really hopeful, really tangible changes that could completely transform your monthly budget. But more than that, it's about restoring a sense of security and dignity. This is your path forward. So let's just start with a simple question. What if an extra $200 just showed up in your account every single month? No strings attached. Just take a second and think about it. What would that change for you? You know, that $200 a month, it really adds up. We're talking about an extra $2,400 a year. And that's not just some number on a screen. That's a real resource for the things that matter most to you and your family. Okay, so let's get into it. Where does this new income actually come from? We're going to break down these proposed increases piece by piece, so you can see exactly how the numbers could add up to a huge change in your financial reality. First up, let's talk about the Social Security Expansion Act. The idea is to move the average monthly benefit from around $1,905 to $2,105. And the key takeaway here, it's a straightforward, across-the-board $200 monthly increase for every single person receiving Social Security. Next, let's look at Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. Now, the SSI Restoration Act is trying to do something really fundamental. Lift benefits up to 100% of the federal poverty line. This would mean about a $130 increase each month, finally moving folks from below the poverty line to just above it. And, the changes go way beyond just the monthly check. For decades, if you were on SSI, you couldn't save more than $2,000 without losing your benefits. It was impossible to build a safety net. This proposal dramatically increases those limits to $10,000 for an individual, finally letting people build a small emergency fund without being penalized. So we've seen all the numbers. But what do they actually mean for your day-to-day life? This is where we get to the heart of it, how those dollars translate directly into dignity. $200 isn't just a number. It's real stuff. It's tangible. It could be 40 gallons of milk, or maybe it covers 10 of your doctor's copays. It could pay for 3 months of internet access, or just mean you can finally afford fresh fruits and vegetables every week. But you know what it really buys? Peace of mind. This quote, wow, it just perfectly captures the reality for so many people. Let me tell you about Margaret. Her story really highlights the impossible choices that millions of seniors on fixed incomes are forced to make every single day. So before any increase, just look at Margaret's budget. It's on a knife's edge. All the essentials, housing, healthcare, food, they eat up almost everything. And see that tiny little sliver? Just 7%? That's all that's left for an emergency, a new pair of shoes, or any small comfort in life. But look what happens with that extra $200. Her budget isn't just bigger, it's healthier. That little slice for everything else more than doubles. That isn't just money, my friends. That is breathing room. That's the ability to handle a surprise car repair without having to sacrifice your medicine.
For Margaret, this change means she doesn't have to choose between food and medication anymore. She can actually manage her health properly and have a small cushion for emergencies. This is about so much more than money. It's about restoring the dignity that every single person deserves. Now, these proposed improvements, they don't just exist in a vacuum. They actually build on some recent victories that are already providing real, lasting relief and creating a much stronger foundation for long-term security. Let's take a look at what's already been accomplished. A huge win was the Social Security Fairness Act. See, for years, these rules called WEP and GPO unfairly cut the benefits of public servants, people like teachers and firefighters, just because they also had a public pension. Well, this act finally repealed those rules, restoring the full earned benefits that these folks were entitled to all along.
And here's another massive victory: the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. This recently passed law created a major new tax deduction for seniors. We're talking an extra $6,000 for single filers and $12,000 for married couples. That is a direct boost to their take-home income. And the impact of that law, it's profound. I want you to think about this for a second. Because of these changes, a staggering 88% of all Social Security recipients will now owe zero. That's right, zero in federal income tax on their benefits. This is a monumental shift that provides immediate relief for millions. You know, these financial changes are so important because they give you the security you need to appreciate what really matters. So for this last part, let's look beyond the bank account at the real foundation of your worth and the future you're building. Financial security isn't the end goal, right? It's the foundation. It provides the stability that lets the things that define your true worth really shine. The wisdom you've gained from a lifetime of experience, the relationships you've built, the contributions you've made, and the incredible resilience you've shown time and time again. It is so important to remember this. Your value as a person, the impact you've had, the legacy you've created, none of that can be measured in dollars and cents. Your worth extends far, far beyond your bank account. So as we close out, I just want to leave you with this question to think about. With the promise of greater financial stability and with the recognition of your inherent value, what will your future of dignity look like? It's a future you've absolutely earned, and it is filled with hope. You know, there's so much talk about increasing Social Security and SSI benefits, but what does that actually mean for the millions of people who depend on them every single month? Today, we're going to go way beyond the headlines. We're going to break down the real numbers, see the impact on a monthly budget, and get a feel for what this kind of financial uplift could truly look like. Let's dive in. All right, so let's start with this number, $1,905. Right now, this is the average monthly benefit for a retired worker on Social Security. And for so many people, this isn't just some extra cash. It's their entire income. It's the number that has to cover absolutely everything: rent, food, healthcare, you name it. So the big question is, in today's economy, how far does this money actually go? Well, take a look at how fast that average benefit just disappears. Based on national averages, housing and utilities alone can take up nearly $800. Then you have groceries and healthcare, that's another $700. After you factor in just basic transportation, you're left with $70. $70 for the entire month. For a car repair, a new pair of glasses, a birthday gift for a grandchild, I mean, it is a razor-thin margin with absolutely zero room for anything unexpected. So, to really get the full picture, here's our roadmap for today. First, we're going to look a little closer at that fixed income reality. Then, we'll introduce two key proposals that are designed to change it. We'll spend most of our time visualizing the direct financial impact of these proposed changes. After that, we'll look at how these increases would be funded. And finally, we'll boil it all down to the bottom line on what this all means for benefits. Okay, so let's start with that fixed income reality. That $70 margin we just saw, that isn't just a number on a chart. For a huge part of our population, it's a daily source of stress and incredibly difficult choices. The financial pressure is just immense, and for a lot of people, Social Security is the only thing standing between them and actual poverty. And these figures right here really show you just how vital these benefits are. For over 40% of women and almost as many men over 65, Social Security makes up more than half of their income. Just let that sink in for a second.
And for 15%, that's about 1 in 7 seniors, it makes up over 90% of their income. So we're not just talking about tweaking a budget here. For millions of people, a change to this benefit fundamentally alters their ability to survive. Okay, so what are the proposed solutions on the table? Well, there are several pieces of legislation aiming to tackle this financial strain head-on. We're going to focus on 2 of them. And each one proposes a really clear and significant increase to those monthly benefits. All right, the first piece of legislation is called the Social Security Expansion Act. It's a pretty comprehensive bill, but its most direct, most immediate impact really comes down to one key number. And here it is. This act proposes a very straightforward, across-the-board increase of $200 per month. And that's for every single Social Security recipient, whether they're retired, disabled, or survivors. That works out to an extra $2,400 a year. Now, this isn't your typical cost of living adjustment that changes every year. This is a direct, fixed boost to that base benefit, and it's aimed at providing immediate relief. Now, the second proposal we're looking at is the SSI Restoration Act. This one targets a different, but often overlapping, group of vulnerable Americans. Now, before we get to the numbers on this one, it's really important to clarify what SSI actually is. Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, is a federal program that basically provides a financial floor for adults and children with significant disabilities or for seniors over 65 who have very, very little income and few assets. It's an absolutely crucial safety net, but as we're about to see, the current benefit level often falls way short of covering just the basic needs. The SSI Restoration Act aims to fix that by increasing the maximum monthly benefit by about $130, which would bring it up to $1,073. The goal here is really specific and significant: to lift the benefit to 100% of the federal poverty line, making sure the most vulnerable people in our country are no longer forced to live below it. And this is the heart of our explainer. Because, knowing the proposed numbers is one thing, but seeing how they can completely transform a real-world budget, that's something else entirely. So let's apply these increases to the financial situations we looked at earlier and see just what changes. Okay, let's go back to our average senior's budget. Remember, before the proposed change, they had an income of $1,905, and after covering necessities, they were left with just $70. Now let's add that proposed $200. The monthly income jumps to $2,105. The cost of necessities, that stays the same at $1,835. But just look at the difference in the bottom line. The remaining funds leap from $70 to $270. And that right there is the key takeaway. That $270 isn't just a number. It's a transformation. It's the difference between constant anxiety and actually having a small cushion. It's being able to afford fresh produce instead of just canned goods. It's the money to fill a prescription without having to cut back on groceries. It's the freedom to handle a minor emergency without going into debt. We're talking about a nearly 4-fold increase in discretionary funds, which would fundamentally change someone's quality of life. Now let's do the same thing for an SSI recipient's budget. The current maximum benefit is $943 a month. With necessities costing around $920, that leaves a perilous $23. The SSI Restoration Act would increase that total income to $1,073. Again, necessities stay the same, but the remaining funds, they jump from just $23 to $153. I mean, this is absolutely life-changing. It means being able to afford new glasses, or replacing worn-out shoes, or simply having a small emergency fund for the very first time. It's a move from pure survival mode to a state of basic stability. Of course, the natural and very important question that follows all this is, how would we pay for these increases? Well, the proposals don't just create new spending, they also outline specific ways to make sure the program stays solvent for the long haul. So let's take a look at that side of the equation. So the proposal outlines 2 key changes to make sure it's funded. First, a direct funding source, applying the Social Security payroll tax to all income above $250,000. Right now, there's a cap, which means high-income earners stop paying into the system partway through the year. This change would simply ask the nation's highest earners to contribute more. The second part is a change to how benefits are calculated in the future, proposing a whole new inflation metric for adjustments. Now, this second point, it might sound a little technical, but it is absolutely crucial for long-term stability. It's called the CPIE, or the Consumer Price Index for the Elderly. It's designed to more accurately measure the inflation that seniors actually experience. Now, why does that matter? Well, it's because seniors spend a much larger chunk of their income on healthcare than everybody else, and healthcare costs rise much faster.
So, by using the CPIE to calculate future cost of living adjustments, or COLAs, the annual increases would better keep up with the real-world expenses that people face, preventing them from losing purchasing power over time.
Okay, so we've walked through the problem, the proposals, the impact, and the funding. Let's bring it all together and really summarize the bottom line. What are the most essential takeaways from all this financial info?
At the end of the day, it really comes down to these two numbers: a proposed $200 monthly increase for Social Security recipients and a proposed $130 monthly increase for SSI recipients. These aren't just abstract percentages. They are fixed dollar amounts designed to provide immediate, predictable relief to millions of Americans living on fixed incomes.
And that really is the fundamental purpose here. The aim is to move beyond complex formulas for a minute and just deliver a simple, powerful boost to people's income. The goal is to create more breathing room in those tight budgets, to reduce financial stress, and to restore a measure of dignity and security for everyone who relies on these programs.
And that leaves us with a final thought to consider. Beyond the immediate impact on individual budgets, how might a direct, significant, and fixed increase in benefits change the entire conversation we have about retirement security and the social safety net in this country? It's really a question about what we value and what level of security we believe every person deserves after a lifetime of work or when they're facing a severe disability.
The $2,200 bonus check. You know, before we even get to the nuts and bolts, let's just start with the one question that's really at the heart of this entire debate. When you think about a Social Security check, is it a nice little bonus on top of everything else, or is it an absolute necessity, the money you need to survive? It turns out the answer to that question might have everything to do with the actual dollar amount on the check.
Okay, let's dive right into this first part and get to the core of the proposal. It really all comes down to this one number that basically acts as a dividing line.
And here it is. The key number in this whole plan is $2,200 a month. You can think of it as a conceptual line in the sand. This is the threshold that, according to the proposal's research, really separates two completely different ways people experience their Social Security benefits.
Now you might be thinking, okay, $2,200, is that high, is that low? Well, here's the context that makes it so interesting. The average Social Security benefit for a retiree right now is just a little under $2,000 a month. So this proposed line in the sand isn't some far-off high-income number. It's actually really, really close to what the average American is getting today.
So why that number specifically? Where did $2,200 come from? Well, the logic behind it all comes from studies that found beneficiaries tend to fall into two very distinct camps, and it all depends on which side of that line their monthly check falls.
The data paints a picture of two different worlds. For people getting less than that $2,200 threshold, their payment is what you'd call a necessity check. I mean, this is the money they count on for rent, for groceries, for the basics. But for those getting more than $2,200 a month, the story changes. They are much more likely to have other sources of income, right? Things like pensions, 401ks, investments. So for them, the Social Security check feels less like a lifeline and more like a bonus. It's a nice extra, but it's not what's keeping the lights on.
And this quote right here, it just nails the core idea that's powering this whole proposal. It's a pretty simple observation, right? The more money someone gets from Social Security, the less they tend to rely on it, and the more it starts to feel like bonus cash. That single idea is the justification for this entire reform. All right, so we get the why behind this dividing line. We see the logic. But what about the how? What are the actual mechanics here? How would a plan like this work in the real world?
Okay, so the plan basically unfolds in 3 steps. First, it would gradually start to reduce the monthly benefits paid out to the highest earners. Step 2, and this is a really big one, it would limit how much of the annual cost of living adjustment, the COLA, that those high earners get. So their benefits would grow a lot slower. And third, and this is crucial, the money saved from those first 2 steps doesn't just disappear. It would be directly reallocated to boost the checks for the lower income folks.
So, and this is probably the most important thing to get about this plan. This is not about cutting Social Security spending overall. Not at all. It's about an internal redistribution. The whole idea is to shift funds from the people who see it as a bonus over to the people who desperately need it as a necessity. It's about strengthening the safety net for the people who need it most, using the money that's already in the system.
But what's the end game? I mean, this isn't just about a few tweaks here and there. There's a much bigger, long-term vision. And that vision is to reach a state they call equilibrium. Let's take a look at what that actually means.
So what on earth is equilibrium? Well, the long-term goal is to dramatically narrow the gap between the biggest Social Security checks and the smallest ones.
The idea is that over time, by giving more to those at the bottom and slowing the growth for those at the top, all the benefit payments would slowly start to converge towards some kind of middle ground.
Now, I've got to stress, this isn't something that would happen overnight, not even close. The proposal lays out a very slow, very gradual process. It could take 20 years, maybe even longer, to get there. You'd move from the big disparities we have today through a decade or more of slow reallocation until you eventually hit that projected state of equilibrium.
Okay, as you can probably imagine, a plan this radical faces some serious pushback. And the main criticism isn't just about the numbers. It's a deep, philosophical question about what this change would fundamentally turn Social Security into.
The big fear for critics is that by pushing all benefits towards this equilibrium point, you're essentially transforming Social Security into a form of guaranteed basic income, or GBI. And a GBI is a totally different animal. It's a system where everyone gets a standard payment from the government, no matter what they paid in. That idea runs completely counter to the way Social Security was originally designed.
Let's really break down this critique. The number one concern is that this plan changes Social Security's entire purpose. It would shift it from being an earned benefit, something you get based on your work history, to being a needs-based program, kind of like welfare. Critics also point out a huge risk. What if this new equilibrium benefit ends up being too low to actually help anyone? But maybe the biggest issue for them is that it completely breaks that sacred link between what you pay into the system and what you get out of it.
This table just lays out the debate perfectly. On the left, you've got Social Security as we know it today. It's an earned benefit. What you get is directly tied to your lifetime earnings. But on the right, you have this proposed new system, and its basis isn't your work history, it's need. The goal isn't to reward your contributions, it's to provide a standard floor for everybody, which means all the benefit levels eventually have to merge together.
So at the end of the day, that's what this entire proposal forces us to grapple with. It's a fundamental question about the very identity of Social Security. Is it supposed to be a safety net for everyone, making sure no one falls below a certain level? Or should it remain a reward system, a program that reflects a lifetime of hard work and contributions? The answer to that question is going to shape retirement for millions of Americans for generations to come.
Today, we are diving deep into a topic that, honestly, is at the core of financial security for millions of people. We're talking about some major proposed changes to Social Security and SSI benefits. So, we're going to break down exactly what these proposals could mean for you, for your budget, and look, this isn't just some dry policy talk. This is about real stability, real peace of mind for so many families out there.
But you know, before we jump into all the legislative jargon, let me ask you a really simple question. Just think about it for a second. What could an extra $200 a month do for you? For real? Would that cover the grocery bill that just seems to get higher every week? Would it mean you could actually pick up all your prescriptions without having to stress about it? Maybe it's finally being able to visit the grandkids, or just, the simple relief of having a little bit of a cushion for emergencies. I want you to hold on to that thought, because that real-world difference, that's what this is all about.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the tough reality of living on a fixed income right now. Then we'll get into the exciting part, the proposed financial boost. After that, we'll see what a transformed budget actually looks like. And finally, we'll talk about how this goes way beyond just the money. It's about dignity.
All right, first up, let's ground ourselves in the numbers. Because to really get why these proposals are such a big deal, you have to see the kind of financial pressure people are under every single day.
Wow, okay, this chart right here really tells the whole story, doesn't it? Take a look. The average Social Security check is about $1,905 a month. Now, stack that up against the cost of just the basics. We're talking rent, food, healthcare, the essentials. That comes out to about $1,835. That gap? I mean, it's tiny. We're literally talking about living on a financial razor's edge.
And that tiny gap leads to this number right here, $70. After everything essential is paid for, that's what's left for the entire month. Just think about that. $70. Is that enough for new shoes when your old ones have holes? What about an unexpected copay at the pharmacy? Or a birthday gift? Or heaven forbid, a car repair? That's not a buffer. It's so small that one little thing going wrong can just completely throw you into a crisis.
And we have to remember, for so many people, Social Security isn't just some extra pocket money. No way. It's their primary lifeline. Sometimes it's the only thing they have. I mean, look at these stats. Almost half of all women over 65 are counting on it for at least half their income. And for 12 to 15% of all seniors, it's basically 90% or more of their entire income. This isn't some abstract problem. This is the day-to-day reality for millions of people, for our parents, our neighbors, our friends.
Okay, so we've laid out the problem pretty clearly. Now let's get to the good part, the proposed solutions. There are two really key pieces of legislation on the table that are designed to tackle this financial squeeze head-on, and they each focus on a different group, but both are absolutely vital.
So the first big one is called the Social Security Expansion Act. This thing is a potential game changer. The goal is super simple and direct. Put more money into the pockets of every single person who gets Social Security. It's not some complicated, targeted thing. Nope. It's a straightforward, across-the-board increase meant to make a difference right away. And it's also designed to make sure the whole program stays healthy for the long haul.
And here's the headline number, the big kahuna, a $200 increase every month for every single person on Social Security. Do the math on that. That's an extra $2,400 a year. For one person, that could completely cover your out-of-pocket drug costs for the year, or a major car repair you've been putting off. Now, what if you're a couple and you both get benefits? That's $4,800 a year. That is not a small tweak. That is a substantial, truly life-altering increase.
Now, the second key proposal is the SSI Restoration Act. This one has really focused on some of our most vulnerable folks, seniors, and people with disabilities who depend on SSI. The truth is, for decades, SSI benefits just haven't kept up with the cost of living, and it's basically trapped people in poverty. This act wants to fix that. It would raise benefits up to 100% of the federal poverty line, and this part is also huge. It would finally update these super outdated rules about how much you can have in savings, rules that haven't been touched more than 30 years.
So, this all leads to the most important question, right? What does this actually mean for your budget, for the real-world decisions you make at your kitchen table? How does this change the math from just scraping by to actually having some stability?
Okay, let's go back to that average budget we looked at. On the left, you've got the before picture, that income of $1,905, with basics eating up $1,835, leaving you with that shaky $70. Now, look at the after picture on the right. The income jumps to $2,105, the cost of necessities is the same, but what's left over? It skyrockets from $70 to $270. That's a massive jump. That's the difference between constant anxiety and actually being able to breathe. A $270 buffer means you can plan, you can save, you can just live with a whole lot less fear.
And this chart really helps you see that new reality. Yeah, of course, housing and healthcare are still the biggest pieces of the pie, but look at that new slice that pops up. 8% for quality of life. That's not just some leftover pocket change. That is a real part of the budget now. It's money you can actually use for things that make life worth living. A hobby, maybe. A trip to the museum. Taking a friend out for lunch. Or just building up that emergency fund. It's the shift from a survival budget to a living budget. A budget with dignity.
For someone on SSI, the change is even more staggering. Let's talk about Robert's story. Before, his benefit of $943 a month left him way below the poverty line, with just $23 left after covering the absolute basics. I mean, he was literally trapped. But now, look at the after. The SSI Restoration Act bumps his benefit up to $1,073. That pulls him right up to the poverty line. So maybe he spends a little more on better food, puts a tiny bit aside, and he still has $43 left. Okay, it's still tight for sure, but the change is monumental. He's no longer living in official poverty. He can buy shoes without holes in them, maybe even save up to go see his daughter. That is a profound difference.
Look, these numbers are powerful. They really are. But the real impact here, it goes so much deeper than a spreadsheet. Let's talk about what this really means for a person's day-to-day life, for their dignity.
This quote right here, this just cuts right to the heart of it. This is Margaret's reality, and it's the reality for millions of others just like her. Should she buy the fresh vegetables she needs for her health, or should she pay for her blood pressure medication? These are just impossible choices, choices nobody should ever have to make. Food or medicine, health or heat. That constant stress just grinds you down. This is the human cost, that tiny $70 buffer we talked about earlier. So let's see how this changes things for her. Let's walk through what we're calling Margaret's new dignity budget. Her income goes up by that $200. Now look at the difference it makes. Her grocery budget goes up by $70. That's huge. It means she can actually buy the fresh produce she needs for her diabetes. She can now start a $100 emergency fund, a little financial safety net that just wasn't possible before. And instead of just hoping there's money left for clothes or soap, she has a real planned budget for it. But maybe the most important part, she has $100 budgeted for quality of life. This budget isn't just bigger, it's proactive. It's a plan for being healthy and secure, not just constantly reacting to one crisis after another.
So the big question is always, okay, great, but how do you pay for it?
Well, the Social Security Expansion Act has a pretty clear answer. Right now, there's a cap on how much of your income gets taxed for Social Security. So if you make $1 million a year, you pay the exact same amount into the system as someone who makes, say, $160,000. This proposal changes that. It says we're going to start taxing again on all income over $250,000. Basically, it just asks the wealthiest people to pay into the system on all their earnings, just like most working folks already do. And get this, that one change wouldn't just pay for the increase, it would make Social Security financially sound for another 75 years.
And it's not just about a one-time boost either. These proposals also try to fix a problem that's been around for a long, long time, the annual cost of living adjustment, the COLA. Right now, it's calculated using a general inflation number, but let's be real. Seniors spend way more of their money on healthcare and housing, and the costs for those things have been going through the roof. So this proposal says, let's use a smarter formula, the CPIE, which is actually based on what seniors really spend their money on. This means that every year, the adjustment you get would actually keep up with the real cost you're facing.
So that brings us back to where we started with a question, but maybe a bigger one. All these numbers, these budgets, all the details, what they're all really getting at is this. After you've worked your whole life, paid in, raised a family, what does a dignified, secure retirement really look like? What should it look like? The proposals we've gone over today, they offer one possible answer. It's a vision of a future where those impossible choices are off the table, replaced by stability, where all that anxiety finally gives way to a little peace of mind. And that's something worth thinking about.
Okay, so first things first. Why are we even talking about an idea this huge? Well, it's because it's trying to solve a really fundamental problem that's kind of baked into the Social Security system right now. A massive and frankly growing divide between the highest and lowest paid beneficiaries. I mean, just look at this. The scale of this gap is pretty staggering. On one end of the spectrum, you have some people getting as little as $50 a month. 50! And on the other end, the maximum benefit is over $5,000. That's not a gap, you know? That's a canyon. And it basically mirrors the same income inequality we see all across the economy.
And that massive gap has a very real, very human cost. This number right here, 11 million, that's how many seniors in this country are currently living below the federal poverty line. For so many of them, their Social Security check just isn't enough to feel secure. And this right here is the exact problem a flat benefit is trying to fix.
And you know, even if we look at the averages, the picture isn't all that great. The average retirement benefit is just under $2,000, and the average for disability, or SSDI, is even lower, just under $1,600. Now, that might sound okay to some, but when you factor in the crazy inflation we've all been dealing with, the actual buying power of that money is shrinking fast, and it leaves a lot of people on incredibly tight budgets.
So you've got a problem this big. How do you even begin to fix it? Well, the solution being proposed isn't some minor tweak. It's a complete overhaul. The whole idea is to move away from our current earnings-based system to something way simpler and, yeah, a lot more radical.
And here it is, the whole proposal in a single number, a flat, universal monthly benefit of about $2,200 for everyone. It wouldn't matter if you were a CEO or a part-time worker, or whether you're getting retirement or disability benefits. Everyone would get the same foundational payment. For millions of people, that would be an absolutely life-changing increase.
So what would this actually do? It would fundamentally change what Social Security is. Right now, it works kind of like an earned pension, right? Your benefit is calculated with this complex formula based on your 35 highest earning years. A flat benefit system just tosses that out the window. It turns the program into a true social safety net, one that provides a uniform financial floor for absolutely everyone. The big question, of course, is how in the world could you get from our system today to that one? You can't just flip a switch overnight, that's for sure. The proposal gets that, and it lays out a very gradual, long-term plan for rebalancing the whole thing. Okay, so this is really the nuts and bolts of the plan. For people at the very top of the benefit scale, those annual cost of living adjustments, the COLAs, they would stop. Instead, their benefit might even be reduced by a tiny percentage each year. And that money would then be used to actively boost the benefits for people at the bottom. The idea is that over, say, 5, 10, maybe even 20 years, the two ends would slowly move toward each other until they meet at that middle point, that equilibrium, like the proposed $2,200.
So where would all that money saved from the high-end benefits go? Well, there are a couple of ideas on the table. One option is to just redirect all of it to boost payments for lower-income folks, which would make that convergence happen faster. Another idea is to split it 50-50. Use half to raise the floor for those who need it most, and put the other half back into the Social Security Trust Fund itself. That could help with those long-term solvency problems we're always hearing about. Now, a change this dramatic isn't just about the numbers on a check. Not at all. It represents a really deep philosophical shift in how we think about the purpose of Social Security. And it actually has a lot in common with another big idea that's been gaining a lot of steam lately.
And that idea is Guaranteed Basic Income, or GBI. You've probably heard about the pilot programs popping up all over the place. They're all based on a simple idea. Give a specific group of people a set amount of money every month, no strings attached. A flat Social Security benefit would basically turn the program into the largest GBI in the world, one that's focused on seniors and people with disabilities.
And this really gets to the core of the change. We would be moving from a system that says you get back a benefit related to what you put in, to a system that says, as a member of this society, you are guaranteed a basic level of security. It's a fundamental move from rewarding the individual to supporting the collective.
So, as you can probably imagine, a proposal this transformative is controversial, to say the least. It kicks up a really fierce and fundamental debate about what's fair, what our responsibilities are to each other, and really the very nature of the social contract.
The main argument against it is captured perfectly by this quote. For a lot of higher income folks, Social Security isn't a welfare program. It's a pension they paid into their entire lives. They played by the rules, they paid more in taxes, and they planned their whole retirement around the promise of a higher benefit. To them, cutting that benefit feels like the government breaking a promise.
So the whole debate really boils down to this. On one side, you have people saying this is the most powerful tool we could ever imagine to fight poverty among the elderly and disabled. It creates a simple, fair safety net. But on the other side, critics are saying it's just fundamentally unfair to people who paid more in, and it pulls the rug out from under those who plan their lives based on the system we have now. It's a clash of two very, very different visions.
And that really leaves us with the ultimate question here. At the end of the day, what is Social Security for? Is its main purpose to reward a lifetime of work based on what you paid in? Or is it to guarantee that no senior or person with a disability has to live in poverty? This proposal really forces us to pick a side, and the answer to that question is going to define the future of retirement for generations.
What if your financial future was about to get a major, and I mean major boost? Well, today we're going to break down some really key proposals that could mean more security, more dignity, and just more peace of mind for millions of people. And it all starts with one number that could change everything. Let's just put this number right out there, $2,400. Now, this isn't just some random figure we pulled out of thin air. It represents the potential extra income you could see in a single year from one of the key proposals we're going to talk about today. So just take a second and really think about that. What would that mean for your budget, for your family, for your own well-being? That's really the big question we're unpacking today, how these numbers on a screen could translate into real, tangible improvements in your life.
Okay, so where could all this extra money actually come from? Well, the first big proposal on the table is basically a direct raise for your retirement. And the details, honestly, are pretty exciting.
The Social Security Expansion Act is proposing a really straightforward, across-the-board increase of $200. And that's not a one-time thing. That's $200 times every single month for all Social Security recipients. You do the math. That's the $2,400 a year we just saw. And you can really see the transformation on this chart. It shows the shift from a budget that's, super tight with maybe a tiny bit left over to one with some real breathing room. That jump right there, that represents the powerful change from just barely getting by to feeling genuinely more secure. Here's how the math breaks down for an average person. Right now, after all the essential bills are paid, you might have about $70 left. But with this increase, that leftover amount could jump all the way to $270. That's nearly 4 times the spending money each month, which gives you real choice and flexibility. So, where are these big ideas coming from? Let's take a quick look at the actual legislative blueprint that's aiming to strengthen financial security for millions. There are really 2 key proposals leading the charge here. First, as we mentioned, is the Social Security Expansion Act. That's the one with the potential $200 monthly raise.
And the second one is the SSI Restoration Act, which focuses specifically on improving benefits and, restoring some dignity for folks who receive supplemental security income.
Now, for SSI recipients, this act proposes a monthly increase of $130. And the goal here is really specific. It's to raise the benefit up to 100% of the federal poverty level, which would be a much-needed lift.
And it's not just about the monthly check. The act also wants to raise the amount of money you can have in savings without losing your benefits, all the way up to $10,000 for individuals. I mean, this is a huge deal for being able to build a small emergency fund and finally gain a little bit of security.
But let's be real. How do these numbers on a page actually translate to necessities in your home? Let's get into the real-world impact, because that's where these proposals truly come to life.
This quote, which is inspired by so many real stories, it just gets right to the heart of it. It's about transforming daily life, right? Moving away from that constant financial anxiety and toward the dignity of just being able to afford essentials like medicine and healthy food. This chart here gives us a great picture of what that new financial freedom could actually look like. It means being able to use your money not just to survive, but to actually thrive, to cover fresh groceries, get vital medications, and maybe even have enough to put into savings or go visit loved ones. And to put it in even more concrete terms, just think about what an extra $200 can actually buy. We're talking about tangible, everyday things that make a massive difference in your quality of life. It's not some abstract number. It's security you can actually hold. So, beyond direct benefit increases, there's another really powerful proposal out there to improve financial security. And this one is all about letting you keep more of the money you already have through tax relief.
A proposal called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act introduces a new additional tax deduction, $6,000 for individuals over 65 and $12,000 for couples. Now, this would be on top of the deductions that already exist, and it directly lowers your taxable income. Plain and simple, it means you keep more of your own money.
So, what does that actually mean for your wallet? Well, for a senior with a $30,000 annual income, these changes could translate into an estimated $1,250 in annual tax savings. That's over $100 back in your budget every single month. And the scale of this potential impact is just massive. If this passes, an estimated 88% of all Social Security recipients could owe zero federal tax on their benefits. Let that sink in. Zero. That is a true game changer. So, when we put all of these pieces together, the proposed benefit increases and the potential tax relief, we start to see a really clear path forward. It's a path toward a future with greater financial dignity and real security for everyone. And if you're sitting there wondering, okay, but can these proposals actually become reality? Just consider this. The Social Security Fairness Act recently became law. This isn't a proposal anymore. It's a concrete victory that has already ended unfair benefit reductions for 3.2 million public servants. And the impact is real, and it's immediate. Thanks to this new law, the people affected are seeing their monthly benefits go up by an average of $360 to $450. This just proves that positive, meaningful change absolutely can and does happen. So let's just quickly recap the path to security that we've explored today. It all starts with proposals for direct, significant benefit increases. Those increases then translate into a real-world impact on necessities. Then, that security could be strengthened even more by tax relief. And all of these steps are leading toward one clear goal: a more secure and dignified future for you. And that really brings us to our final thought. With these potential improvements on the horizon, the question becomes a personal one. What would that future look like for you? How would having greater financial security actually change your life?
Today, we're diving into some really big proposals that could change the monthly benefits for millions of people who receive Supplemental Security Income, or SSI.
All right, let's start with this number. For 2025, the absolute maximum federal SSI benefit for a single person is $967 a month. That's the ceiling, the most anyone can get from the program each month.
And that brings us to the big question, right? With the cost of everything these days, rent, food, you name it, a lot of people are asking if that amount is really enough to get by.
So to really get what these proposals are all about, we first have to understand the problem they're trying to fix. And it really all comes down to a growing financial gap between SSI benefits and the official poverty level.
You know, it's interesting.
When this program was created more than 50 years ago, the whole point was to act as a safety net, to keep people right at the federal poverty line. But over the decades, well, it's fallen behind.
And this chart just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the max SSI benefit at $967. On the other, the 2025 federal poverty line, which is $1,304. You can literally see the gap right there. And that difference comes out to $337 every single month. That's the shortfall. And that number is at the absolute heart of this whole debate.
You can really feel the urgency in this quote from our source material. I mean, that's pretty powerful language, and it just shows how strongly some people feel that the system needs to be modernized to close that gap.
Okay, so we've seen the problem. Now, what are the proposed solutions? Well, the first big one is a piece of legislation aimed squarely at closing that financial gap we just looked at.
It's called the SSI Restoration Act. You can basically think of it as a big package of updates trying to modernize parts of the program that, frankly, haven't been touched in decades. The single biggest, most significant change in this act would be to raise the maximum monthly benefit to match the federal poverty line. The goal is to get the program back to doing what it was originally intended to do.
So remember that $337 gap? This would close it. For someone getting the maximum benefit, this would mean a direct increase of $337 a month, bringing their total from $967 up to that poverty line figure of $1,304.
Now, this is absolutely critical to understand. This is a proposal. It's being discussed, but it has not been passed by Congress. It is not current law.
Okay, so the next big proposal tackles another part of the program that critics say is seriously out of date, the super strict limits on how much money a person can have in savings.
These limits on assets, they haven't been updated for inflation in decades. This makes it almost impossible for people to save up even a small emergency fund for, a car repair or an unexpected bill.
And the proposed change here is huge. The asset limit for a single person would jump from the current $2,000 all the way up to $10,000.
And for married couples, the increase is just as dramatic. It would go from that long-standing $3,000 limit to a proposed $20,000.
To put that in perspective, for an individual, that's a 500% increase in how much they'd be allowed to save without being penalized or losing their benefits.
So, with such significant changes on the table, the natural question is, okay, what's the holdup? What's the current status of all this in Congress?
So just to sum it all up, the SSI Restoration Act is really this bundled package of reforms. It's trying to raise the benefits to the poverty line and also massively increase those savings limits, tackling the two major issues we've just covered. And this brings us to the bottom line. As of today, August 16th, 2025, the SSI Restoration Act has not passed. It is still just a proposal.
So that leaves us with a final thought for this explainer. When you look at that documented gap between the benefits and the poverty line and the fact that these rules haven't been updated in decades, it really makes you wonder, what level of priority should reforming SSI have on the national agenda?
Today, we're diving into something that can make a real, tangible difference in your financial security. We're going to break down a proposal that could mean a much brighter, more stable future for millions of people. And you know what? It all starts with one single number.
So just take a moment and really think about it. What would an extra $2,400 a year mean for your budget? For you, would it kind of ease that stress you feel at the end of the month? Maybe it means you could finally visit the grandkids or just worry a little less. This isn't just some fantasy number. It's a real possibility we're going to explore right now. And there it is, $2,400. That number is really at the heart of what we're talking about today. It represents a potential annual increase for every single person receiving Social Security, a figure that could honestly transform a budget from just barely surviving to actually living. All right, so where exactly does this potential boost for your budget even come from? In this first part, we're going to get into the specifics. We'll look at the proposals on the table and what they actually mean in clear dollars and cents terms. Here it is, plain and simple. This is the core of the Social Security Expansion Act, a direct, across-the-board increase of $200 a month.
And this isn't just for some people, but for every single person who gets Social Security. It's a simple idea, but wow, does it have a powerful impact. And that $200, it's not just a number on a piece of paper. It's real-world relief. We're talking about 10 doctors' copays you don't have to scramble for. It's being able to stay connected online with family for 3 whole months. It's having enough to finally start that little emergency fund for when the car, inevitably acts up. This is what actual relief looks like. And hey, for folks receiving Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, the proposed changes are just as big a deal. The SSI Restoration Act is all about raising benefits to 100% of the poverty line. I mean, just look at the difference here. It's the difference between struggling $130 below the poverty line and finally reaching that baseline of security. This is no small tweak. It's a life-changing shift. Behind all these numbers and percentages are real people with real stories. So in this next part, we're going to move beyond the spreadsheets and look at how a financial boost like this could actually transform daily life, turning that constant stress into a new sense of security. This is a direct quote from a woman named Margaret, and it just perfectly frames the impossible choices that millions of people are forced to make every single day. When your budget is stretched to the absolute limit, these aren't just financial decisions. They're decisions about your health, your well-being, everything. So let's actually look at Margaret's budget right now. After she covers the absolute basics, rent, food, medicine, she's left with just $120. That's it, for a whole month. For clothes, for an emergency, for literally anything that pops up, there is just zero breathing room. Okay, but now let's see what happens to her budget with that $200 increase. Boom. Suddenly, her income is $1,850. She can afford healthier food, and look at this. Her remaining funds more than double to $250. That is the difference between constant gnawing anxiety and having a small cushion, just for some peace of mind. And this chart really shows you that transformation visually. A budget that was all about survival becomes a budget built on stability. And look, you see these new slices appearing. A dedicated fund for emergencies, and even a small slice for quality of life. This lets you shift from just getting by to actually planning for a secure future. The impact here goes way beyond just the money, too. For another senior, a woman named Eleanor, that extra $200 brought something you just can't put a price on. Peace of mind. It meant that knot of anxiety that was always in her stomach finally started to loosen. It meant actually sleeping through the night without waking up worrying about bills. The health benefits of just reducing that stress are absolutely huge. Now, these proposals aren't just about a temporary Band-Aid. They're really about building long-term, lasting security. So let's dig into the structural changes that are designed to make sure these benefits last and can actually adapt to what's happening in the real world. So a really critical piece of this puzzle is the asset limit for people on SSI. That's the total value of resources you're allowed to have. But here's the really shocking part. That limit hasn't been updated in over 30 years. 32 years. It basically traps people in a cycle where they can't save any money without being punished for it. Well, the SSI Restoration Act would change that. And I mean, dramatically. Just look at this jump. The asset limit for one person would go from a tiny $2,000 all the way up to $10,000. This is a complete game changer. It means people can finally save up for an emergency, like a major car repair or a medical bill, without being terrified of losing the very benefits they need to survive. And another really smart structural change is tying future cost of living adjustments to something called the CPIE. Now, in simple terms, this index does a much better job of measuring the expenses that seniors actually face, especially for things like healthcare and housing. This would make sure that benefits actually keep up with the real cost of living year after year. And we're not done yet. There's also a new tax deduction that could mean even more money stays right in your pocket. For senior married couples, this could mean a new deduction of up to $12,000. That could seriously reduce or even get rid of their federal taxes on Social Security benefits. It's just another powerful tool to help build financial stability.
So what does this all add up to? When you pull all these different pieces together, it really paints a picture not just of financial relief, but of renewed dignity. So let's take a look at the combined impact. Okay, let's think about the Johnson family, a couple in their late 60s. Before, they had just $130 left over after paying for all their necessities.
But when you combine the $200 per person Social Security increase with the tax savings, their extra monthly income jumps by $550. Now look at that after column. The money they have left skyrockets from $130 to $680. That is a kitchen table transformation. And what does a transformation like that actually mean in real life? Well, it means no more impossible choices, like skipping your meds to afford a trip to the dentist. It means having an emergency fund ready to go when the car breaks down. It means being able to afford basic dental and vision care. And maybe most importantly, like we saw with Eleanor, it means peace of mind. This quote right here just perfectly captures the essence of everything we've been talking about today. After a lifetime of working hard and contributing, having enough money to cover your basic needs, to see a doctor, to fix your car, and to live without constant fear, well, that isn't a luxury. It's about dignity. So we end right back where we started, with a question for you. Looking at all these potential changes, thinking about that security, that stability, that peace of mind, what would financial dignity look like in your life? It's a hopeful future for sure, and one that's definitely worth thinking about. Today, we are really getting into the weeds on the future of supplemental security income, SSI. There are some huge proposals out there that could completely change the game for millions of people. We're talking bigger monthly checks and a massive jump in how much you're allowed to save. But when you peel back all the layers, all these proposals really come down to one single critical question. Is SSI, as it stands today, actually keeping up with the cost of living? This is the core problem we're going to unpack, because for almost 8 million people, the answer to that question really dictates their entire life. So let's just step back for a second. SSI was created, over 50 years ago, and it had a super clear mission: to be a financial safety net. It was designed to fight poverty, and for a while, it did its job. But over the years, a gap started to appear, and that gap has just kept growing, leaving the whole program and the people who rely on it falling further and further behind.
Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, what exactly is SSI? It's a really important federal program run by the Social Security Administration that gives a monthly income to adults and kids with disabilities, and also to folks 65 and older who have very little in terms of income and resources. And this right here is the absolute key to its original design. The whole idea from day one was that the payments would keep people right at the federal poverty line. Not way above it, sure, but definitely not below it. It was supposed to be a floor, a baseline of financial stability. And remembering that original goal is so important for understanding where things are today.
So this idea of falling behind, it isn't just a feeling. It's not a hunch that things are getting tougher. It is a measurable, quantifiable gap. And the numbers, well, they tell a really, really clear story about the difference between the program's original promise and today's reality.
Okay, let's start with the benchmark. For 2025, the official federal poverty line for one person is $15,650 a year. But nobody pays their rent once a year, right? So let's break that down by month. That comes out to $1,304. Remember that number. It's our baseline. Now let's look at what's actually happening for someone on SSI. The absolute maximum federal payment a single person can get in 2025 is $967 a month. That's the ceiling. You can't get $1 more from the federal government. So right off the bat, you can see those two numbers are not the same. And when you put those two numbers right next to each other, like in this chart, wow, the gap just jumps right out at you. It's not even close. The maximum benefit falls way short of that poverty line, and this difference has just been getting worse year after year. So do the math. The difference is $337. That's the hole people find themselves in every single month. To put it another way, the maximum SSI check is nearly 35% below the very poverty line it was created to meet. That is a massive gap to cover when you're on a fixed income. Okay, so that's the problem. It's a big one. But how do you fix it? Well, there are some pretty concrete plans being floated around. And maybe the biggest one is a piece of legislation called the SSI Restoration Act. It's designed to attack that income shortfall we just talked about head on.
And this proposal is getting a lot of attention. In the source material we looked at, one analyst put it pretty bluntly, saying the SSI Restoration Act, in my opinion, is a really, really good one. It checks literally all the boxes. So it's seen as this complete fix, not just some tiny little patch.
So what are these boxes that it checks? Well, first and foremost, the Act wants to raise monthly benefits to 100% of the federal poverty line. That means, boom, an instant $337 a month raise for someone getting the max benefit. And this part is crucial. It would then tie or index those benefits so they automatically go up with the poverty line every year. That way, this gap can never open up again. The Act also tackles the marriage penalty, which can hurt married couples, and it wants to seriously raise those ancient asset limits, which we're going to talk about next.
Okay, reality check time. This is really, really important to understand. The SSI Restoration Act is still just a proposal. Right now, it has not been passed by Congress. It's been introduced, it's being talked about, but it is not the law of the land.
But, you know, a bigger check is only half the story. There's another huge problem that's kind of baked into the system right now, and it has everything to do with saving money. Okay, so the asset limits for SSI, that's how much money you can have saved up, are stuck in a time warp. They haven't been updated in decades. Right now, the limit for one person is just $2,000. I mean, think about that. Your car breaks down, your fridge dies, you have one unexpected medical bill, that can wipe you out completely. It basically makes it impossible to build any kind of real safety net.
So the proposed fix for this is, well, it's dramatic. The asset limit for an individual would jump from $2,000 all the way up to $10,000. And for a couple, it would go from $3,000 to $20,000. I mean, that is a night and day difference. Let's just pause on that individual number for a second. Going from $2,000 to $10,000, that's a 500% increase. We are not talking about a small tweak here. This is a massive shift in policy, basically admitting that the financial world of today is nothing like it was when these old limits were set. And what does that really mean for someone's life? It's not just about the numbers. It's about security. It's about having that peace of mind that comes from knowing you have a rainy day fund. It means you could actually save for an emergency without that constant fear of losing the very benefits you need to survive. Okay, so we've got these two huge ideas on the table, one to boost monthly income and one to raise the savings limit. But what does it all mean? You know, how does a plan like this go from being an idea to being a reality?
Well, it all comes down to the process in Washington. First, lawmakers have to introduce the bills, which, yep, they've already done. After that, the bills have to get debated in committees and then eventually get voted on by both the House and the Senate. If, and that's a big if, a bill passes, then it goes to the Social Security Administration to actually put the changes into effect. But it's key to remember where we are right now. These are all still just proposals on paper.
All right, so let's just do a quick recap of the whole shebang. We're talking about 4 big things. 1, bigger checks with that $337 monthly boost to get up to the poverty line. 2, higher savings with that 500% jump in the asset limit. 3, fairer rules, getting rid of that penalty for married couples. And 4, future-proofing the system by tying benefits to the poverty line so this whole mess never happens again. When you step back and look at it, these proposals are really a total rethinking of what SSI is and what it does. They're trying to bring it back to its original promise of being a real anti-poverty safety net. But the million-dollar question remains, is there enough political will to make these big plans a new reality for the millions of Americans who rely on it? And that's what we'll all be watching.
You know, when you've worked your whole life, you expect retirement to be about some well-earned security, not constant stress. But for millions of Americans living on a fixed income, rising costs are creating this impossible squeeze. Today, we're going to dig into that reality and look at a couple of major legislative proposals that are designed to try and bridge that very gap. So let's kick things off with the number that's really at the heart of this whole conversation.
Here it is, $1,905. That is the average Social Security benefit paid out every single month. And for billions of people, this isn't just some number on a statement. It's everything. It's the total amount they have to cover every single expense.
So where does that $1,900 actually go? Well, as you can see here, most of it is gone almost immediately. The absolute essentials, we're talking housing, healthcare, food, getting around, and keeping the lights on, they eat up a whopping 88% of that average benefit. That leaves just a tiny 12% sliver for literally everything else: clothes, an emergency, household goods, any kind of quality of life. I mean, it is a budget with basically zero wiggle room.
Okay, so what can actually be done about this? Well, let's dive into the first big proposal that's aiming to tackle this head-on. It's called the Social Security Expansion Act, and it's designed to provide some direct, immediate relief. The idea behind this act is really simple. It's not some complicated new program. There are no vouchers or anything like that. The core proposal is just a direct, across-the-board increase for every single person who gets Social Security. And this is the magic number, an extra $200 a month. That might not sound like a fortune, but it adds up to $2,400 more a year. Now, think back to that budget we just looked at. For someone in that position, this is a huge deal. It could be the difference between having to choose which bill to pay and, well, having a little peace of mind.
Now, the Act is about more than just a one-time boost. It also changes how future cost of living adjustments are calculated. It would switch to something called the CPIE, which is basically a way of measuring inflation that's more tuned in to what seniors actually spend their money on, especially healthcare. So how would we pay for it? The plan is to apply the payroll tax to all income over $250,000. The goal here is to give immediate help while also making sure the whole program stays stable for the long haul.
All right, so beyond Social Security, there's another really important program out there for some of our most vulnerable citizens. So the second big proposal we're looking at is the SSI Restoration Act. This one focuses on modernizing and improving supplemental security income. So what is SSI exactly? Well, think of it as a federal safety net. It gives a basic monthly income to adults and children who have significant disabilities, and also to seniors over 65 who have very limited income and resources. It's a genuine lifeline for almost 8 million people.
But the reality of SSI right now, it's pretty stark. The maximum benefit for one person is over $100 below the federal poverty line. And get this, the asset limits, that's how much a person can have in savings to even qualify, is $2,000. That limit has not been updated since 1992. 1992!
So, the SSI Restoration Act tries to fix these things directly. First, it would raise benefits up to the federal poverty line, finally. Second, it would seriously update those ancient asset limits so people could actually save a little for an emergency without getting kicked off the program. And third, it would let people who are able to work part-time keep more of their earnings. So the whole point is to both provide more and penalize people less.
Okay, we've talked about the policies, we've looked at the numbers, the different acts, but to really get what's at stake here, we need to bring this all down to the kitchen table, where real people are making tough decisions every single day.
So let's just ask the question. What does an extra $200 a month from that Social Security proposal actually look like in someone's day-to-day life? How does it really change the choices they have to make? Let's meet Margaret. She's a 72-year-old retiree. In the before column, you can see her budget is incredibly tight. After she covers the absolute basics, she has just $120 left for the whole month. Now look at the after column. With that extra $200, her leftover cash more than doubles to $250. And we're not talking about luxuries here. This is money for better groceries, like the fresh fruit and vegetables her doctor says she should be eating. It completely transforms her budget from a constant state of crisis to one that has just a little bit of breathing room.
And that quote, that really gets to the core of it all, doesn't it? This isn't just about balancing a spreadsheet. It's about restoring a person's dignity. It's about ending those impossible choices that millions of people like Margaret have to face month after month.
This all brings us to a much bigger idea. Because while these policies are obviously crucial for financial security, they also touch on a deeper question about how we, as a society, really value the lives and the contributions of our older generations.
A person's life isn't measured in dollars and cents, right? It's measured in wisdom, in the communities they helped build, the families they raised. A person's true worth is defined by their character and what they gave to the world. And the policies we've been talking about are really just tools to make sure that financial stress in your later years doesn't get to overshadow a lifetime of value.
So we'll end with this thought. These policies are about creating security, but they point to a much larger question for all of us to think about. In a world that seems so focused on financial metrics,
how do we truly honor and measure a lifetime of contribution? It's a question that really goes beyond politics and gets right to the core of what we value.
So let's talk about something you've probably heard a lot about, this idea of giving every single person on Social Security an extra $200 a month. I mean, on the surface, it sounds amazing, right? A huge boost for millions of people. But, as we're about to find out, when you dig into the details, it gets a whole lot more complicated. All right, let's get into it.
You know, this one quote really just sums up the whole thing perfectly. It's a plan that comes from a really good place, trying to help folks who depend on Social Security. But it's also got this giant, fundamental flaw that makes it, well, almost impossible to actually do. So the big question we're going to tackle here is, what's the good part? And what's the really, really flawed part? And maybe, just maybe, is there a better way to do it?
So, first things first, where did this idea even come from? Because it's not just some rumor bouncing around online. Nope, it actually comes from real legislative proposals that have been kicked around for years. Let's break down what this plan is really all about.
Okay, so this whole idea is a huge piece of something called the Social Security Expansion Act. Now, this act has a lot in it, but the part that gets all the headlines, the part everyone talks about, is that permanent $200 a month raise in benefits. And it's important to note this isn't some brand new idea. A temporary version was talked about back in 2020, but this proposal, this one wants to make that raise a permanent part of Social Security.
Now let's be super clear about what this means for an individual. That $200 every month adds up to an extra $2,400 over a year. I mean, for anyone on a fixed income, that is a life-changing amount of money. Seriously, that could be the difference between just scraping by and actually having some breathing room. And the big promise here is that everyone, every single person getting a Social Security check gets this money.
An extra $2,400 a year. Sounds great, doesn't it? But this right here is where we bump into the other half of that quote we started with, the massively flawed part. And it all boils down to one thing, the absolutely staggering cost of making that promise to everybody. When you start running the numbers, you see the real problem.
First, you have to wrap your head around just how massive the Social Security program is. We are talking about roughly 72.5 million people getting a check every month. And that's not just retirees. This includes people on disability, it includes survivors, it includes spouses. It's a huge, diverse group of Americans who count on that money.
Okay, so what happens when you multiply those 72.5 million people by an extra $200? The math is simple, but the answer is, well, it's pretty stunning. It would cost an extra $14.5 billion. And that's not for a year. That's every single month. That's an enormous new expense that has to be covered every 30 days.
And when you stretch that out over a full year, the true size of the price tag just hits you, $174 billion. Just to put that into perspective, the government's already paying out over $1.3 trillion a year in benefits. This would add another $174 billion on top of that, every single year. For a lot of lawmakers, that number stops the conversation cold, especially since the Social Security Trust Fund is already being used to cover current payments.
And this gets us to the real, logical heart of the issue. The cost is so huge because the plan is for everyone, no exceptions, which forces us to ask a really important question. Is this the smartest way to spend that money? Does the person getting the absolute maximum benefit need this raised just as badly as the person getting the absolute minimum?
And here it is. This is the big flaw, laid out for everyone to see. Under this plan, someone who is already getting, say, $4,000 a month from Social Security gets the exact same $200 raise as someone who is really struggling on less than $1,000 a month. Now, don't get me wrong, an extra $200 is nice for anybody, but it's not really needed by people at the top end of the scale, and that untargeted approach is what makes the plan so expensive, and frankly, what makes a lot of people say it just doesn't make sense.
So, if the give it to everyone plan is way too expensive and not very efficient, what's the alternative? Well, this is where the idea of targeting comes in. Instead of a blanket raise for all, what if we focus that money on the people who need it the most? Let's check out a couple of much more realistic options.
We can really break this down into two simple, logical ideas. The first one, let's call it the half plan, would give that $200 raise only to people whose monthly check is at or below the national average. Then there's a second, even more focused idea, the poverty line plan, which would send that money only to those whose benefits are so low that they're at or below the federal poverty line.
And right here, you can see just how dramatically the money changes when you start targeting it. The universal plan, we know, is for all 72.5 million people and costs $174 billion a year. But look at the half plan. By focusing on about half the people, around 36 million, the cost drops to about $85 billion. And then, with the poverty line plan, targeting the 12 million lowest income folks, the cost plummets to just $36 billion a year.
So this is the key takeaway. Just by being a little smarter about who gets the money, you can slash the cost of the whole thing. Moving to the half plan cuts the price tag by more than half. And going to the super targeted poverty line plan, that reduces the cost by almost 80%. All of a sudden, you're talking about numbers that are way, way more manageable, both financially and politically.
So all this brings us to the final, and let's be honest, probably the most important question. Could any of this actually happen? I mean, a plan is just a plan until it becomes a law. How would politicians in Washington actually look at these different proposals? Well, it really all comes down to the simple math of cost versus impact.
Look, if you walk into a lawmaker's office with a plan that costs $174 billion extra a year for a system that's already under strain, that conversation is probably going to be pretty short. They'll just say it's not going to happen. But if you walk in with a plan that costs $85 billion, or even better, $36 billion, and you can show that every single one of those dollars is going to the people struggling the most, well, that's a completely different conversation. That's a plan you can actually defend.
And that's the political reality of it, right? It's pretty easy to vote no on a massive, unfocused spending bill. It's a whole lot harder to stand up and vote against the plan specifically designed to lift 12 million of our most vulnerable seniors and disabled citizens out of poverty. The moral argument there is just so much more powerful, which makes that super targeted plan the most likely to ever get any real momentum.
So, we end up right back where we started. The idea of a $200 raise is a good one at its core, but giving it to everyone is a deeply flawed approach. The numbers don't lie, a targeted plan is just far more realistic and efficient. But that leaves us with one final big question. We have a logical path that could provide real, meaningful help to millions. The question is, in today's political world, is logic enough to actually get something done for the people who need it the most?
You know, have you ever really stopped to think about what a couple $100s a month actually means? For a lot of us, it might be a few dinners out, maybe a new gadget, something like that. But for millions of Americans living on a fixed income, it is a completely different story. It's not about luxuries. It's the razor-thin line between constant grinding stress and a life with some actual security and dignity. So today, we're going to break down the profound, truly life-altering impact of just $200 a month.
So let's just start with that basic question. What can $200 really buy? And I'm not talking about abstract economic theories here. We're talking about real, tangible things, the essentials that people need just to get by, to live with a basic level of comfort.
And when you look at it like this, it really hits home. That extra $200 could mean 40 gallons of milk, or 100 loaves of bread to keep the pantry stocked. Think about this. It could cover 3 full months of basic internet. I mean, in today's world, that's not a luxury. That's a lifeline to family, to information, to telehealth. Or how about this? It could mean paying for 10 doctor's copays without having to panic and dip into the grocery money. It could be 20 gallons of heating oil to keep the house warm in the winter. These aren't wants, right? These are the absolute building blocks of a stable, secure life.
Okay, but here's the rub. Here's the core of the problem. While a $200 increase would be completely transformative, the reality for most seniors is, well, it's very different. The official benefit increases, what we call cost of living adjustments, or COLAs, they are just not keeping up with how fast real-world costs are exploding. And this creates a really dangerous and frankly ever-widening gap.
And this chart, wow, it just lays the disconnect out there perfectly. Just look at these projected numbers for 2025. The official cost of living adjustment, that tiny little bar, it's 2.5%. That's the small bump in benefits that's supposed to help with inflation. But in that exact same period, look what's happening to essential costs. Average housing costs for seniors, they're jumping 5.8%. And healthcare costs, they're soaring by 6.5%. I mean, you don't need to be a math genius to see the massive problem here. Seniors are falling further and further behind, month after month.
And if you want to see what this looks like for a real person, let's talk about Maria. She's 78. She relies entirely on her Social Security. So that 2.5% COLA increase, for her, it worked out to an extra $39 a month. $39. But then you add it all up. Her rent went up, her utility bills are higher, food costs more, her prescriptions cost more, her essential expenses shot up by $201. So now do the math. She's left with a $162 deficit every single month, just to stay where she was the year before.
She's actually getting poorer, even though she got a quote-unquote raise.
To really get the human cost of this financial squeeze, let's follow the story of a woman named Eleanor. She's 74, and before her income changed, her life was basically a masterclass in financial anxiety. Honestly, her budget tells you everything you need to know.
So this is her reality, right here on the screen. Eleanor's total monthly income from Social Security is $1,750. Now, her essential, non-negotiable costs, we're talking rent, utilities, groceries, Medicare, prescriptions, and just basic transportation, that all adds up to $1,650. That leaves her with just $100. $100 for everything else. A new pair of sneakers when hers were out, a car repair, a birthday gift for her grandkid, any unexpected medical bill. Forget it. That is an impossibly thin margin for error. And you have to understand, living this way isn't just about being frugal or clipping coupons. It is a life defined by constant, gnawing stress. It means waking up every single morning with that knot in your stomach, already running the numbers in your head. It means having to make impossible choices, like, do I refill the prescription that helps with my arthritis, or do I make sure I have enough food to last the week? This isn't just a budget, it's a blueprint for anxiety.
But then, something changed for Eleanor, and this is where the story really pivots. We're moving from the problem to the solution.